presidential candidates, scientists, activists. But I had kind of taken a hiatus because I have two children who are very heavily involved in the sport of wrestling. My daughter's a national champion. My
Wow.
son's a state champion who's beaten two national champions. I just haven't taken him to any national tournaments, but took a lot of time. And my big reason why is that when I was younger, my dad didn't really support anything I wanted to do. So I decided when I was going to be a parent, well, I was going to be the dad that tried to help them with whatever they wanted to do.
That's
Well,
cool.
anyway, now that they've kind of gotten much more accomplished and they're considerably older, one of the things I would say that kind of snapped things into place for me, obviously, the pandemic, left me at home alone a lot more often, and then the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff was a big part of it, but the Bernie Sanders campaign was also a big part of it,
Mm.
and that's what led to me, kind of dusting off my old headset, and I decided to try to switch a little more to the YouTube medium. I still do podcasting, and one of the things I noticed when I made the transition was that people who listen to podcasts do not always watch YouTube, and people who watch YouTube do not always listen to podcasts.
That's a fact. Absolutely.
So, in
Mhm.
any case, what drove me was not about the right versus left politics. What really bothers me, because one of the things I discovered was that I didn't realize this because I had been out of political mode for so long, but on my main Facebook page that is not normally political, I'd post a Bernie Sanders thing, and then I'd find out just how many Trump supporters were on my on my feed. Just like lots and lots and lots of conservatives, not
Mhm.
necessarily all like MAGA hat wearers or anything, but still, So they came out like bees, and then my liberal friends and my progressive friends would argue with them, and I had to like calm it down and go like, hold on, guys, on my page, don't be mean to each other.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I realized, first of all, I did a bit of an experiment. One of them was, I talked to these people and I explained to them, what was different and why I supported Bernie. And because they trusted me and because I made sure that the conversation was civil, those guys all voted for Bernie in the open primary. Now,
Mm.
not because of the fact that they would ever vote for him, say, as opposed to Trump, but they
Mm.
recognized that if it did come down to that, and if the Democrats did win, they would much rather have Bernie Sanders, who's a genuine person, than
Mm.
Joe Biden.
Right.
And they certainly would have never wanted Hillary Clinton. So my point is that what I learned out of that is that the right and the left cannot communicate anymore, and it's
Mm.
very clear to me that there is some force that has an interest in that, in
Absolutely.
dividing and conquering us to the point of sheer irrationalness. And I think that one of the things that really pushes me now, and that's why I tell people who are listening,
Hmm.
even if you're right or left, I guarantee you'll still find that you'll still enjoy most of my content. And I kind of
Mm.
tell people in advance, what I'm doing it for. So, for example, I got a video on there about the minimum wage, and I got a
Mm.
video on there explaining why I support Bernie Sanders. But I
Mm.
don't I don't require that my listeners agree with everything I say. In
Mm.
fact, I tell them I don't want you to. All I
Mm.
want you to do is think. All I require is that they are nice to each other in my chats during my live streams. I try
Mm.
to tell them to avoid personal attack. I'm like, disagree till the cows come home, but
Yeah.
practice having real debates with as little logical fallacy as possible, because this is a skill that we are losing.
Mm.
And I think that, unfortunately, um, it's very difficult for a lot of people to do that right now. And I think that there are multiple forces that are at work to cause that. Have you ever
Hmm.
watched the documentaries, The Creepy Line or The Social Dilemma?
No, unfortunately, no.
So those good documentaries were, that's why like when this new whistleblower came out to talk about Facebook and the algorithms, I kind of chuckled because this isn't news. There were whistleblowers who were already doing that, and they made those two documentaries, and there are more. But basically, they expose that our social media algorithms are actually designed specifically, now they claim only with the purpose to keep you on your phone or your computer as long as possible. Well,
Absolutely. Hmm.
what two things do that the most? Shit
Mm.
that pisses you off or stuff that enforces your exact worldview.
Absolutely.
So if you
Hmm.
are only exposed to that all the time,
Hmm.
then you're only going to see, what progressives want to see or the worst of conservatives. And if
Mm.
you're on the other side, you're only going to see what, say, Trump supporters want to see or the worst of the left.
Mm.
And if you're constantly exposed to that, then that begins to influence your reality. And
Mm.
we're seeing this in this Rittenhouse case more than anything, because I
Mm.
still run into people all the time on the far left who still believe things about the case that were disproven like a year ago.
Yeah,
And they
like
still,
state lines, and you brought the gun over state lines and all that stuff. Absolutely.
Right. So that's why I got involved in V Radio, and I tell people I did it again and try to invest a lot more time in it. And there was another part of it is that because I'm disabled, and in addition to that was high risk for COVID, I was home a lot. And people talk about Andrew Yang and the UBI, and they say people wouldn't be motivated or whatever, and there's something to that. But I can tell you that I played video games for about 2 weeks, and it drove me absolutely nuts. And so I had to be productive. So now I literally get up probably about 9 a.m. and I'm literally making a video, and I won't be done with it probably until 9 p.m. I work more now than I did then. And it's because I like what I'm doing, and I feel that I'm trying to help the world. And I actually I refused to take any donations for the longest time. And it's part of it is that when my podcast was at apex, I had about 500,000 listeners worldwide.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was an international audience, and that helped. But the point is that during that time, I might bring in $1,000, $2,000 a month just for my podcast. The problem is that it eventually starts to change your relationship with your work. And I didn't like that. And now, I've kind of come to a point where it's like, all right, well, I'm still kind of screwed here. My unemployment is gone. And so I need to do something productive. And I decide, well, if you guys want to support me, go right ahead. It'll just affect how often I can do this, because if I can't, get the donations, then I'll have to do it less. But I still made it very clear to them, I'm not going to compromise my message for you. I'm not going to cater to you, because one of the things that's a problem with the media right now is that everybody's put in a media bubble. And there were several things. I'm trying to go through this quickly. So the fairness doctrine was eliminated by Ronald Reagan. And that meant that they didn't have to give equal time to both sides of the political spectrum or any issue. Then Bill Clinton deregulated the amount of the media that one person could own. There was once a time when you couldn't own more than a certain percentage of the overall media. Right. Then Bill Clinton deregulated that. And then as a consequence, you have people like Rupert Murdoch, who owns 70%? I can't remember. I used to have it memorized. The point is he owns an enormous amount of the media. Right. And then now, one more thing that happened was Fox News got sued for something, and then they won the lawsuit. And the judgment was that news organizations are no longer obligated to tell the truth, and they're not in any way.
I think that was Tucker Carlson on one of those guys that basically said it's just entertainment, it's just opinion, it's not real, and you should not believe what they're saying. I remember that they spoke about that because it affected both MSNBC and Fox News. It's very interesting.
Right, exactly. And as a consequence, this is the example I give. And mind you, this analogy will make more sense to me than maybe other people, because I follow the legitimate sport of wrestling. But our current media is basically like real wrestling as much as the WWE is. And I don't just say that to be funny. The reality is that it's now a crafted narrative, specifically designed, weighed, and measured to fit your audience. And it's not just the social media algorithms that do this. CNN and MSNBC especially are crafted specifically for that audience. Yeah. They're going to tell you anything that, and that's why you're listening to all kinds of insane, crazy Rittenhouse stuff on that network, because they don't have Trump anymore.
They're calling this little boy a domestic terrorist.
Right. And meanwhile, ignoring the other domestic terrorists that exist that have been active for, all of summer 2020. It's crazy. But and then meanwhile, if you go to Fox, you're going to get that crafted narrative. And, then the Young Turks is basically like Fox News for progressives. So they're more like if there's the fringe leftists, the AOC Bernie types, then they're Fox News for them. Right. And what I tell my viewers is that you need to expose yourself to people you don't quite agree with and figure out what you do agree with them on. And that's not how things operate anymore. So anyway, that was the thing about V Radio. I talked for a bit. So if you want to comment on that before I go into my background.
No, okay, it's all cool. Good. Yeah.
All right, just and do interrupt me if you ever need to. I'm asking you to. So if you ever want to say anything, do not hesitate to interrupt me.
Well, it's my show. It's what I feel like it now.
No, I'm just making you clear that it won't offend me.
No problem.
So the second thing is about my background. So when I was very little, we lived on a farm, but it was during the time period that Willie Nelson was literally doing Farm Aid concerts to try to rescue the American farmer. My father went bankrupt. My parents got divorced. And as a consequence, we moved out into the ghetto. Basically, I spent some time in the projects in Ohio, but most of it was in Pontiac, Michigan. Now, that's as far as the ghetto part. I should actually rewind a little bit because I also spent some time in Florida in the unspoken of white trash ghettos in the trailer parks in the South.
Okay.
And so, like, extreme poverty. Then we moved up to the ghetto. So I got exposed to it on both sides. I also got exposed to racism on both sides because in the parts of Florida where we lived, people would still use racial slurs to name things. Like, there's a nut, for example, that looks like it could be the toe of an African-American person. What do you think they call them? So that kind of crap. I had a black friend down there, and we literally had to kind of play in seclusion because we didn't want to run into racist white kids. But on the same token, then when I moved to the north, for whatever reason, when I lived in Pontiac, Michigan, the Farrakhan Muslims lived there, the Nation of Islam, and they had enough influence that they were even allowed to do a public school presentation where they showed up to tell us that the white man is the marked race of Cain, and that mixed race people are abominations. This is my school.
White man's the devil.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is at my school.
Right.
And so as a consequence of this, there was lot.
Was that
Go
the
ahead.
earliest form of critical race theory?
Well, no, that's just straight up unrepentant black supremacy. They literally believe they are the world's chosen. But the point is that it created an enormous amount of anti-white racism.
Right.
And all the things that you like, for example, I took a test to determine my privilege once. And because I could answer, have you ever been targeted for violence due to your race? Yes. Where you went to school, were any of the extracurricular activities for your race, or were they only for another race? And I went, well, yes. I could literally just go down the whole list and not be privileged. But if they had ever seen my skin when I was done with that test, they would have told me that I was privileged anyway.
Right.
So, but the big point is that one of the things that I struggle with right now is that the reality of what goes on in those neighborhoods is not being spoken about.
Right.
And that is that I grew up when, like, my mom was pretty good at picking houses for us, but at one point our neighbors literally just developed into a crack house. And as that happened, I didn't need Nancy Reagan to tell me just say no. All of the motivation to not get involved in drugs I ever needed happened when I was at a playground and there was this guy digging in the gravel.
Right.
Just digging in the gravel. He was digging in the gravel for like an hour. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Because at this point I'm still a country kid. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Right.
And this kid tells me, oh, well, he dropped his crack rock. I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't ever want to be like that. And then I just got so much exposure to that. But one of the big things that I would say is that a lot of the stuff that's associated with being of a certain race, perhaps it's a black stereotype. It's not. It's a ghetto stereotype. There is a culture that affects everybody there. Like, one of the reasons I like the film Gran Torino is that it talked about Asian gangs.
Yeah.
And what do those gangs act like? They all talk like gangster rap, people. And so I guess my point is to say that culture affects everybody who lives there.
Right.
Like, it's not just black people. And as a consequence, there's different ways you can react to it. My little sister was much younger than me. So, like, if you ever met the two of us, you would never believe we were related because she is so absorbed in it, talks like it, thinks like it. That's her value structure, has kids with like multiple fathers, she's absorbed in that environment. And as a consequence, we don't really have anything in common. I thankfully enough was old enough that my sense of morality and values was already developed before I moved there, but so now what I see, and this kind of, we'll go back to so I've spent time at Occupy Detroit and Occupy Flint, where it had a big impact on me.
Well, hold on. How did you get to that point?
How did I get? You want to like the filler?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in an entertaining way, of course, but how did V Radio get involved in those type of movements? What inspired you to get to that point where now you're doing Occupy?
Well, it started with, like I said, I would go back to like what kind of created V Radio. It was started with Ron Paul. Then I started working with Senator Mike Gravel and actually worked for him as a consultant for a while. And he's, a progressive. But around that time was when I started, I got to get more involved. Then in specific, I would say the thing that inspired me was specifically the moment in the movie V for Vendetta
Mm-hmm.
when he's giving the speech before London,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that he said there, about, especially the part where he says, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look in the mirror. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, he's talking about people who don't do anything. They don't get
Mm-hmm.
involved. They don't, Now, mind you, the movie version of V is different than the comic book. The comic book is considerably more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But so when I say V, I'm talking about the movie. But regardless, that was what kind of convinced me to get, to, I guess, pilled me, so to speak, to get me involved and to get active and actually do something. I was always kind of politically, independent minded because of the way my mom raised me. We leaned left, but she still like had an understanding for things like, for example, personal responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that unfortunately gets left out. So that's what led to me going to the I got involved with that. And then there was another thing that affected me was watching the movie Zeitgeist Addendum,
Mm-hmm.
and that exposed me to a man named Jacques Fresco. And I actually became friends with Jacques, and I went and hung out with him, and like lived at it, like not live but stayed at his house for a little bit, and he came up here to see me. And but I learned a lot about his approach to things, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
drastically changed my outlook on how to handle like improving the world. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of put that on the back burner for the time being, but that was a major impact. And basically, one of the biggest things about the way he approaches things is that he feels that you need to use science to come to conclusions about things. You need to be
Mm-hmm.
very rational in your approach, and that one of his problems with the way we govern ourselves is that we don't do anything scientifically. Like he pointed out, he's like, you used to work with Ron Paul. Ron Paul is an obstetrician. What does an obstetrician know about, say, bridges or, the Pentagon budget, or,
Mm-hmm.
he's a baby doctor. Like none of those things mean anything to that, and he made a very valid point. Now,
Right.
it would be too much for me to explain, his work in just one day, but
Mm-hmm.
he had a profound impact specifically on the fact that one of the problems that we have right now, and this is something that he actually cautioned me about, and I didn't understand at the time, was that he said, you have to avoid getting involved in what he would have referred to as specific group grievance activism. And I said, what do you mean? Because like he doesn't advocate specifically going after racism or sexism, for example. He believes we should rebuild society to level everybody up, like, just all at once, and
Right.
raise all of society to a new level. Now, that would be too deep for me to explain today, but the
Mm-hmm.
point is that I was like, well, what is it? Why do you oppose it? He's like, well, this guy, by the way, was over 100 years old. He was alive during the Great Depression, so he'd
Right.
been
Right.
around.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, this is what I've seen. He says that people who do this, he said, they start with the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm.
But before long, equality is not enough. They get drunk on the power, and then eventually they start seeking advantage for whatever group that they are pushing for. And
Mm-hmm.
they start to become exactly what they seek to oppose.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, basically he's saying that if you go down the racial path, then you're going to start finding yourself in a situation where now equality is not enough.
Right.
Now I need more. Now I need, now I need an advantage, or I need justice for things that happened hundreds of years before I was born, or whatever.
Right.
It's the same thing he said with sexism and all of that. So the zeitgeist movement at its apex, because it's kind of in a slump right now, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a time period where we had chapters literally all over the world with people who would come into one TeamSpeak server, and there would be meetings with countries all over the world. Like if you go back and listen to some of my podcasts from that time, for example, I
Right.
once had a panel with people from literally like every major Middle Eastern country was on my show. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I met them was because of the zeitgeist movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so in any case, the big point about it was that he said that, and I accepted it because he was kind of my mentor, and I didn't really get it until we went to Occupy. And when I was at Occupy, initially, Occupy was like that, colorblind, gender neutral. We accept everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't matter what your position is in life. We're all equals here. And Occupy, when it started, was one powerful tribe. We all lived together in the parks, and we protected each other. It kind of reminded me of like when you watch The Walking Dead, like the groups within The Walking Dead are usually so diverse because they're just random people picked out of the world, who managed to come together. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
Occupy was like. So there was no divisions. And we had like a consensus decision making model that does work for a lot of things. it works better when we were all treating each other as the same because we were one tribe. Then at some point, I would say largely because we were starting to make serious headway, and Occupy had a lot of support. Occupy was devoted to the Martin Luther King ethics of peaceful protest.
Right.
And if Antifa in its previous incarnation showed up, and they did, they would go around behind our peaceful marches and break shit, and then we would have to, do public relations to denounce that. And that's something I feel that modern leftists are not doing. Unfortunately, especially Black Lives Matter. They don't own up to it. They just kind of either make apologies for it or they even encourage it. Like basically what happened is Antifa wanted us all to be like that. They saw Occupy as their opportunity to try to overturn the world because Occupy is not Occupy. Antifa is not just motivated by fighting fascists. Antifa is an anarchist organization, and they try to pretend, right? And they try to pretend that they're not. See, back in Occupy, they were open about it. They're running around with communist flags and shit. They weren't even kidding about it. Now, sometime around 2017 was when everybody started pretending they didn't exist. But that's a separate issue. But the point is that you can go back and look at, say, even on leftist outlets, you would see them openly talking about Antifa. It's a thing. And there was a time when even the government was like, Antifa is a concern for domestic terrorism. It was actually it was the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
It's the only time I've ever seen the government ever talk about Antifa as a possible threat. Never again. But anyway, we were committed to nonviolence. And as a consequence of that, we were getting support in Occupy. We got all kinds of donations and stuff to be able to help us do what we were doing. So if you can imagine, it's what Chaz was trying to be, but with sensible ideas about security and taking care of ourselves and protecting ourselves. That's what Chaz did not have. Chaz had people walking around with AR-15s, bullying people, and then they ended up, we don't like police. People. Yeah, they murdered people. I actually had a villain report. Was the guy who got the footage of that because he was in Chaz when they murdered a black man and injured his 14-year-old son.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they never talked about it ever again. But the point is that Occupy, we had a security system in place that actually made sense, and everything was about de-escalating conflict. Because again, we were a peace movement. So in any case, what I noticed was eventually these teach-ins started happening specifically about racial issues, gender issues, LGBTQ community issues. And at these things, what would start to happen is that they needed to start preaching what now has become the woke movement. And I watched as what was this beautiful, unified tribe disintegrated into warring factions. Because you'd be at a meeting and suddenly it was, well, you're a white male, so you don't really have a position to speak on this issue, or then they'd get into, there was this thing called the progressive stack that got pushed on Occupy. And the stack was, okay, if you want to talk during the consensus meeting, then you get in the stack. And the stack used to just be, well, whoever walks up there and puts them in, and then we let them in a chronological order. Progressive stack is, well, depending on how high on the intersexual oppression list you are, determines how fast, when you get to talk.
Right.
So that meant black, gay, trans, whatever. Well, look at that. You're first in line. White male, you may not even get to talk.
Right.
And the only reason that that's a problem is that it had, if it was just about necessarily trying to make sure everybody gets to talk, that would be one thing. Any good facilitator of what is called consensus decision-making is already supposed to make sure that everybody gets to talk. It's that it came down to validity of your point of view was determined by that. So even if somebody who is more has more woke points lined up in the oppression Olympics is talking, you're just expected to shut up and pretend that they're correct, even if they're not.
So a white guy can't say anything basically, and if you're a black, trans, gay, whatever, you're at the top of the list. Everybody just has to basically listen to your point of view is what you're saying, basically.
Right. And again, if it was just about letting them talk, that would be different. But it would be, they would say something that's factually incorrect. And if you argue with them, then it's your white privilege.
Right.
And I mean, you see that right now. What happens when you try to share strategy if you happen to be Caucasian with the Black Lives Matter movement and you say, you know, I think this approach to activism is not such a good idea because you're not winning anybody over, then you get told, well, white people don't get to tell black people how to protest,
Right.
as if there's some special black people way to protest. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like activism is public relations.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
and it doesn't change. The laws of public relations do not change based on your
Mm,
skin color or your level of oppression. Something
mm,
is either effective or it's not. You know, I mean, hell, Martin Luther King got his strategies from Gandhi, who's
right.
Indian. You know, it's not.
Absolutely.
It was you know, was it a black way? Was it not? So the other thing that happened at Occupy that I noticed was that groups like BAM, for example, were trying to turn the group more and more militant and violent. And at the time, we rejected that. Now, however, they seem to have positioned themselves in the perfect place because now Black Lives Matter is essentially, I would call them the angry grandchild of Occupy, but
Mm,
they didn't take nonviolence with them in an effective way. And more importantly, there were communists at Occupy, but we were not a communist movement. They were there, but they didn't demand that the whole movement be like them. You
right.
know, now you have three founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and they're all communists,
Yes, they are.
hardcore. You
And they
know,
don't like black men.
right? Yeah,
I
that's
read that
and
with my own eyes. I thought it was a Republican talking point. And I was like, these conservatives are probably saying that just because they want to destroy this movement. This is in the early stages. And then I went on their website before they sanitized it, and I witnessed with my own eyes their true ideology,
right,
communism, and just the marginalization of black men in the family structure. It's like, wow, it's over.
right. And so what evolves out of that is now we are in a situation where they say they want fathers, like, you know, black people need fathers, and it's not just black
Absolutely.
people, it's
Yep.
poor people.
Yep. Yep.
No, poor people need fathers. Okay, but now you're telling them they're toxically masculine. You know, what the hell does that mean? Well,
Mm,
I know what it means, you know, because, like, so for example, I still go back to my hometown in the ghetto
mm,
because there's a wrestling team there, and I befriended some of the guys who run it. And my son, as a result, when I take him there, he's the only white kid on the team. But like
mhm,
they're not jiving with any of this stuff because they
mhm.
recognize that it's not going to help their kids. What helps their kids is having mentors who get them off the streets, you know, and give them an outlet for any aggression they have. That's what wrestling does for them,
Right.
you know. And the funny thing is they'll tell you straight up that they're not on board with any of that stuff. Like, so how is it that people making positive influence, you know, impacts on the community are
Mhm,
not popular, or rather not interested in what Black Lives Matter has to say? And
mhm,
it's for the things like we talked about a bit off the air. They're not presenting solutions, they're presenting scapegoats. They're giving you
mhm,
excuses. And the problem is that if you try to talk about personal responsibility with leftists,
mhm,
one of the things that you run into is that because, say, Ben Shapiro accurately depicts what the problem is,
mhm.
then they just discount it because he said it. And then you can't even
Exactly.
repeat it as if he
Absolutely.
wasn't right. Like, there's
Mhm,
one clip where he's debating Black Lives Matter and they start laughing at him and he just starts spitting stats at them. And everything he said was absolutely correct. You tell me why black people are not graduating high school. You tell me why they're getting, you know, having babies out of wedlock. You tell me, like, he just went down the list. And
mhm.
those are the same things I might add Louis Farrakhan says, you know, but
Right,
nobody wants to talk about that, you
right.
know, and
Well, on my show, I try to talk about the statistics of the amount of black people that died due to black violence, but
right.
violence within our own community. And once again, people shut you down. Oh, but what about this? And what about that? What about institutional racism? What about this? Listen, I'm not saying you're wrong, but these are numbers we have to recognize and we have to deal with. We have to
Sure.
acknowledge that it exists. And I find, which is what it seems like you're saying, is that people, they just don't want to deal with uncomfortable topics. They just pretend as though it doesn't exist just to fuel their own narrative rather than actually confronting it and saying, all right, well, yeah, this is a fact. All right, so this is how we deal with it. It's just like, whatever, doesn't matter.
Well,
Keep it moving.
the part about it that they don't want to confront that requires activism to fix is the culture. And
Mm,
that's why I said it's not even a racial issue, it's a cultural issue. The
absolutely.
you know, and the culture is this. When I grew up in Pontiac, doing good in school was literally something you could get your ass kicked for. Like,
Absolutely.
I knew kids who hid their report cards. You
Hmm.
know, because that was, of course, back before being called a nerd was a cool thing. Being called a nerd used to be a thing that you'd get beaten up for. The point is that being good in school, getting a job, those are things were mocked. And you don't want to be, what was cool was all the boys wanted to be gangbangers and all the girls wanted to date them.
Absolutely.
And what does that create? Well, it certainly doesn't create people who are going to grow up and have, any kind of semblance of a good life. And the problem is that I think the only way to fix the problem would be some issues of the left, some issues of the right would need to be unified. So the perspective of personal responsibility is still very valid to people who live in those communities.
Right.
And if we don't have it because you're telling them, well, no, what your real problem is the suppressor class, then they're not going to bother spending any energy on that.
No.
You
gave them a scapegoat. You gave them an out.
Well, right. And they do things that enrage me. Like, so if kids who live in the ghetto don't have good language, then they label it as some other vernacular. And then they tell the schools to lower the requirements. I'm like, no, why don't you effing teach them how to read?
That's
like,
correct.
Come on, what is wrong with you?
They don't even teach script anymore in schools.
No, they don't. And that's not even just a problem in the ghetto, mind you. Like my son, we live in a country town now, but they don't even bother to teach him how to spell. They don't teach him how to write because they give them all, devices and then they say they don't have to. But in the ghetto, the schools are there, and the teachers are trying, but the kids are not interested. And if they want to change anything going on there, that's what, so for example, they're trying to bring critical race theory to our school system right now. And because I actually grew up in the ghetto, I'm sitting here listening to people lecture me about issues with people of color. And I'm like, bitch, how many people of color do you even hang out with? Like, it's like, I go back to those neighborhoods on a regular basis to wrestle. It's like, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
Their situation is this: telling a bunch of white kids that they're white privileged in some tiny country school is not going to fix the goddamn problem. The problem needs to be fixed where I went to school.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's not going to be fixed. It's not going to be fixed by telling those kids that their real problem is these white kids who are not even there.
Right.
It's not. It's going to be about concentrate on your education, make it something beneficial to you. And that's why I told you about Pastor Corey Brooks. He works in Chicago.
Right.
And he runs an effort to get kids, he'll help any poor kid, but the point is mostly about the Black community in Chicago.
Right.
And he says, I'm getting them into apprenticeships for the trades because trades are awesome right now. And then I get them through school and get them their GEDs. And then he also specifically helps kids who've gotten out of jail to make sure that they don't go back. And his organization struggles for funding. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter is sitting on millions and not doing anything.
Right.
Not anything valuable other than buying themselves mansions and crap,
Right.
So anyway, that was kind of, I guess, my background to where I'm at, and where I got to where I'm at. And it's good to be able to meet you and talk to you. You said you were a police officer?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because I've been wanting to talk to another one, because that's the other thing that changed things for me that makes it difficult is that during a long time period of my life, I worked at this 24-hour gas station. And so there were a lot of cops that would come in because they're bored, because nothing's going on. And I just got to sit down and talk to cops for hours and hours and hours. And I really started to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And that's not something that's being done either. You see, that's the other thing that's different. Don't get me wrong. We cared about police brutality at Occupy. But depending on your Occupy camp, in many cases, the police were also supportive.
Right.
You remember Occupy was started because of the bank bailout. Well, the cops thought that was bullshit too.
Yeah.
You're just going to give them a bunch of money because they just, took a bunch of poor people's houses away. And then not only did they get the money for their mortgage, they also get to keep the goddamn houses. Like, it was a total hustle. And then after begging us to save the economy with our taxpayers' money, they went and paid themselves bonuses. That's what triggered Occupy.
Absolutely. I remember.
The major thing that was different was, and this is where the problems are now. At that time, that's the effort I was talking about earlier about the show I did, that there are statistics that show how the media trends moved away from discussion of class and wealth inequality and into issues of racial and gender equality. So what you have now is that you're being told, no, the real problem is that the world has been designed around white people, and that's where the disparity is. And it's not that it never happens. It's just, to me, first of all, having grown up in the ghetto, I was like, no, I don't think that's it. But it was also that I know people from all over the world because my viewers are from all over the world. And if you go to Mexico, there's no white people to blame your problems on there, but there's still
No.
pockets of, huge pockets of poor and small pockets of rich. If you go to Hong Kong, same thing. You go to any of these, like all over the world, this is how it is. It does. But the other thing that they have in common is that the wealthy understand that it's their job to collude to make sure that we don't, meaning that they will find ways to divide us. In the United Kingdom, the British Empire divided the Irish clans by getting them fighting each other. And then they'd
Right.
make sure that they fought the Scottish. And as a consequence, it took forever for Ireland to finally get England out of there. Well, those are all
Right.
white people.
That's true.
I thought imperialism only happens, in a white versus color dynamic. That's what CRT says. I just did a show about that because The Root had this woman on who's a professor, and they talked about critical race theory. And one of the things she says in her presentation was that, white people don't want, us to be in this situation because they think the only way to be human is to be imperialists. You see, black people used to like travel the world and travel the oceans interacting with each other peacefully, and I was like, what is she talking about? Because like and for me it wasn't just about like any difference between the races. I studied Shaka Zulu because I loved that show that came on when I was a kid.
Yeah, we
And
all
so,
seen that show.
well, that's what I'm saying. We were a white
Right.
family and we loved that show.
Yeah.
And I mean, but that guy was a brutal freaking imperialist. And like, there's all kinds of African kings that did it. It's not that they're any worse or better at it, but that
It's
was
just
the point.
human nature. It's just human nature.
Right, exactly. And so my point is just that she's lying. It's like, and when I was like, she's saying, well, critical race theory is making sure that we have an honest assessment of history. I'm like, okay, well, you just like, because I'm also Native American and I've heard the noble savage myth too. The Comanche, they were absolutely imperialist, genocidal. Like, the Comanche basically would take anything. If you couldn't defend it, then you didn't own it as far as they were concerned. And they would kill men, women, and children. They would slaughter entire tribes. So so the point is that this notion that only people who happen to have white skin pigment are the ones who engage in that behavior is just ridiculous.
Right.
And more than that, what really bothers me is that it's starting to remind me of what it sounded like when the Nazis were demonizing the Jews.
Right.
And literally like complete with master race theory. Like, I'm sure you've heard the melanin is supposed to make you a superhero.
Right.
I often read this clip because a Black Lives Matter organizer from Ontario made the mistake of saying the quiet part out loud once, and basically just goes on this rant about whiteness is not humanness and white people are genetic defects and all this other crap, and yeah, there's all, if you haven't seen it, I'll show it to you, but it's nuts what she said, and she
Right.
deleted it, and then eventually she stepped down. But when there was one of the things that unfortunately the black supremacists who used to be kind of fringe see all of this as an opportunity for them to take root and to try to grab. It was funny is do you know who Daryl Davis is?
I've heard the name before.
Yeah, well, Daryl Davis is a black man who went out of his way to befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan, and he essentially rescues them from the Ku Klux Klan. Like
I heard a little bit about him. I definitely saw him. I just never dived deep into it.
Oh, he's fantastic. Well, anyway, he was on my show, and we discussed this. Was that he basically the way to defeat racism is to humanize yourself to those people, and then eventually racism just looks dumb, and then they abandon it. And that's also, I might add, how Jacques Fresco handled racism.
Right.
You can't get up in somebody's face like that. There's actually science about this. I'm planning to do a show pretty soon. But there's science that notes that there is a primitive part of the brain that will activate if you attack somebody's in group, and that makes them defensive because they think they have to defend like their whole
it's their resistance basically. Like when you shame somebody, the wall comes up. You learn that as a police officer. You know, if you come in hot, you're not going to get any cooperation from the person. You got to, hey, what can I do for you? Can we talk about this? I know exactly what you're saying.
Well, right. And so the point is that I asked Daryl Davis, I'm like, so if I took a Black Lives Matter protest to a Ku Klux Klan rally, what would happen? He's like, well, yeah, that's not going to work. And I just like, and he's trying to I guess I would say rebrand himself, just because Black Lives Matter is finally talking to him, because first time he went to Baltimore, they literally threatened him and told him to never come back, because the idea of somebody showing up and saying, hey, I can teach you how to get members of the Ku Klux Klan to leave racism, to them was offensive, because they're they're in enemy mode. Like, no, the
Yeah,
white people
absolutely.
are the enemy.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point is that when I tell people about these methods, they're not interested. I remember
Mhm.
specifically once they said, well, I don't want to convince people. I want to make them afraid. And I was like,
Mm.
so you don't know where racism comes from, do you? Because it's
It's
pretty much
fear.
about fear.
It's all about fear. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so anyway, they weren't accomplishing anything, but there are people making money. There's a big grift
Mhm.
there. And
Oh yeah.
in addition to that, people
Mhm.
with like less than pure intentions, so for example, black racists, this is the
Mhm.
reason I brought this up, is that Daryl Davis points out that the Ku Klux Klan recruits by going to
Mhm.
poor white communities and convincing them that all of their problems are actually caused by these other people of different color skin than them. Does this sound
Right.
familiar? You
Mhm.
know, and that if we could just get rid of these other people who have different skin than us, then all of a sudden all of our problems will vanish. Well, that's exactly what these racial movements do.
Right.
And my frustration is not specifically about anybody coming after me for being white, while I
Mhm.
find it ironic and usually annoying, because they're often wealthy black kids who, like, my kids will be lucky if they can get to college. It's pretty much going to be on sports scholarships if they're fortunate enough.
Right.
So to be told that I'm privileged, like, in order to live in this country town, we basically squeeze our family into this 2-bedroom apartment,
Right.
like, so anyway, the point is that we have to change this. Like, if the left is going to have any semblance of success, because we're now at a point where we're doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King didn't just oppose violent militant activism because it was immoral. It was because it's not effective.
Right.
And I just did a presentation about that there are several peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate that terrorism, because that's effectively what it is, doesn't
Mhm.
work. Like, you see the new Black Lives Matter commander guy saying, if you don't give us what we want, there will be fires and riots and bloodshed. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
terrorism.
Mr. Newsom. Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, Textbook, and it's the same thing. Antifa's weird, twisted ideology is that they think that they're gonna, that they have the right, they reserve the right to attack anybody who disagrees with them in the name
Mhm.
of fighting fascism. Well, what's fascism? Well, anybody who opposes us, you
Mm.
know, and then they justify it. Well, you don't want to be a fascist, you don't want to be a Nazi, right? Well, then you should just do what we say.
Right.
Well, what's a Nazi? Well, apparently even moderate Republicans are Nazis to them, which is
Yeah.
just bullshit. So the consequence of all this is that, as I said, all of the other things aside, I think this is actually another pinnacle moment. You know who Brett Weinstein is?
No. Elucidating.
So Brett Weinstein was he's a leftist professor who worked at Evergreen State College, which is an
Mhm.
extremely left college. Well,
Mhm.
at one point, so they would do this thing called Day of Absence. Day of Absence would be a day when nobody of color would show up to the college to try to kind of make a point of, this is what would happen. This is our contribution. Now you can see what we bring to this place, because we're not here.
That's
So
a
then they
woke college, man. That's real woke.
Right. No, it just gets worse, trust me.
Mhm.
And I will give you the documentary you should watch about this because it's
Mhm.
terrifying. But regardless, he emails back, and he's Jewish, I might add, with family who survived the Holocaust. They sent out an email saying that, well, this year we're going to do Day of Absence, but it's going to be white people don't come to the college. And
Right.
he was like, so for him, this threw off alarms like, wait a minute, why are people telling me that I can't go somewhere based upon my race? My grandparents said a thing or two about this.
Right.
What does this lead to? So anyway, he wrote an email back saying, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to do it. I understand what you're doing, but I'm not participating. So because of that, they
Mhm.
showed up at his classroom in a mob, calling him racist, saying, you said horrible racist things. You need to
Mhm.
resign. You need to, like, they wanted him off the college for that. And so anyway, what progressed from that was an enormous inquisition. Like, that's
Okay.
one of the other things that I would say is that this is not just like a normal political movement. This is a religion that engages in crusade, that holds inquisitions, to conduct witch hunts, to find heretics,
Mhm.
to label blasphemers, to excommunicate. I
Mhm.
mean, and none of that is hyperbolic. I mean, the excommunication is the cancel culture,
Mhm.
and they're only doing that because they can't usually get away with just being violent.
Right.
And I run into some leftists because of my Occupy background that literally, if they could kill people that are of the opposing political view, they would absolutely do it.
Mhm.
And so anyway, Brett Weinstein was in a moment where this very well, I mean, it's very clear that the mob was being controlled through
Right.
social engineering. And so
Mhm.
there's one moment where he takes a couple of students aside and he says, and he starts talking to them, he starts making some headway.
Mhm.
So one of the witch hunters figures out that people are breaking the spell, so to speak.
Mhm.
And this guy comes over at one point and they start arguing. And unfortunately, this is all on audio, but it only gives, and it doesn't get as much airplay as it should. But there's a moment where he specifically says, you need to stop demanding. This is not Brett. This is somebody talking to him.
Okay.
You need to stop demanding that people use logic and reason and white forms of information. And I went, holy crap. Like,
Mm.
what? Logic and reason are whiteness? And
Mm.
then that cracked into my head. Like, if you remember a while ago, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History
Mhm.
had that thing up on their wall labeling scientific method, rational and critical thinking as aspects of whiteness.
I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, you know who wrote that? Robin DiAngelo.
Wow. Wow.
Right. And so, but my point is that okay, now we're gonna criticize logic and reason itself.
Mhm.
Like, who would ever want to tell a bunch of people that their logic and reason is whiteness, racism? Well,
Mhm.
that would be people that are full of shit who
Mhm.
don't want you thinking for yourself.
Mhm.
At that point, it's a cult,
Mm.
you know. And
Absolutely. Mhm.
And so I'm not on board with anything, and rewinding back to Jacques Fresco, who said that everything should be logic and reason and science.
Mhm.
The other thing that offended me was that as a child, one of my heroes was George Washington Carver,
Mhm.
black scientist,
Mhm.
fantastic. Or the story of Charles Drew, the black
Mhm.
man scientist who
Mm.
invented the technology that allows us to give people blood transfusions.
Mm. Mm.
Why don't, so it's like, science is not whiteness. That's just absurd,
No, it's
but
definitely absurd. Mhm.
But the reason why the people in the sociology fields, because that's where all this shit comes from, and it's not
Mhm.
that sociology itself is a problem, it's that there are
Mhm.
people who invaded it with an
Mhm.
agenda. They are at war with the hard sciences. And the reason why is because they don't want to be held to the scientific method.
Right.
Now, I don't know if you've looked at the grievance studies affair at all, but James
Mhm.
Lindsay, basically, in order to test their theory, because a lot of journals were accepting woke stuff
Mhm.
in the psychology and sociology journals without any tests,
Mhm.
well, this is what basically would happen. They pretended to be
Mhm.
scientists and they
Mhm.
submitted papers.
Mm.
One of the paper that they submitted was literally translating Mein Kampf from Hitler and taking it and taking Jew out and sticking man in. And then
Mm.
they wrote it as a feminist piece.
Mm.
Guess what? Got published.
Wow.
That's how screwed up the social systems are. And then they're still doing it too, and they get away with it all the time. And then they come out and say, oh, by the way, that's a fake article. One of
Mm.
them was suggesting that dog humping in dog parks was proof of rape culture. Like they literally
Mhm.
did that one as a joke, and that got freaking printed too. And then there was one that suggested perhaps we should chain white students to the floor in college classrooms to
Mm.
kind of be like a reparations, or and that also
Mhm.
passed. So
Wow.
the point is that that's how bad our social sciences are right now. And there was a time,
Mhm.
and it is difficult to do scientific method where I test something, I prove my hypothesis. It's
Mhm.
harder to do that with social sciences, but it is possible. But now the way the social sciences work, if you read these sociology papers, in many cases it just reads like somebody giving an opinion, and they don't cite any studies, they don't
Mm.
have any data, and you can't, I'll give you an example. One of the problems that I see right now is with the way we raise our kids,
Mhm.
and they've taken spanking away from us. And I'm not saying that it's impossible to raise
Mhm.
your kids without spanking, but that's not the point.
Right.
One of the major studies specifically that was designed to prevent parents from spanking
Mhm.
literally did this. So now imagine we're going to test how bad spanking is. What does spanking do wrong? Well, they took data from kids who were just paddled sometimes
Mhm.
and put it with the data from kids who were brutally beaten. And so then they combined that data as if those
Mm.
were the same test subjects. And
Right.
then they said, See, all spanking causes more violence, more mental illness, more this. You could never do that in any science following the
Mm,
scientific method. Can you imagine, like, let's say we're engineers.
right.
We're going to write a paper about metal, and we're
Mm,
going to put tin and titanium in the same data set and say,
mhm,
this is the tensile strength of metal. You could never get away with that. But
right.
in the social sciences, you can. And
Mm,
now those anti-spanking studies have been used to take people's children away, to do all
mm,
kinds of stuff. Like, it's having a very real world effect because
mhm,
people still assume that psychology and sociology is operating in good faith.
mm,
Unfortunately, they're wrong. That's
mm,
why Jordan Peterson
right.
is so controversial, because he's a psychologist and he knows what they're up to and
Right.
he understands the jargon and he's not bending, you know. And I'm
Yeah, I'm
not
a big
saying I agree
I'm
with everything he says, but still, go ahead.
no, I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson to a certain extent. I mean, like I said, I don't agree with like you said, I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he's on to something. But I want to go ahead and I want to segue into
Sure.
Kyle Rittenhouse. A lot of people in the chat are like, hey, when we're going to talk about Kyle. But
That's
guys,
fair.
I think it was very important for us to set up, who V Radio is and the perspective that he's going to bring to the discussion of Kyle Rittenhouse, because a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, V Radio, from your experiences dealing with Occupy and your knowledge and your experience dealing with Black Lives Matter and other movements and Antifa, and then also the discussions that we're having about the psychology and sociology of what's happening in our society, that stuff actually is reflective of what's happening in this Kyle Rittenhouse situation. So, you actually produced some really interesting documentaries on the Kyle Rittenhouse case. I encourage all of my viewers to definitely go over to your channel, subscribe to your channel, and also watch a lot of this material that you're putting out there. Can you briefly tell us how you got involved with the Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Well, that was during the time period when I was flirting with the idea of going back into working on my channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started studying what was going on because I had known for a while, because these protests were getting violent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about, do you remember what happened in Portland when that kid, Marcus Love, kicked that white guy in the head and like just beat him unconscious? Were you familiar with that?
Is that one in the store or something like that?
No, they were in Portland, and ironically, they were Black Lives Matter security.
Mm,
And a guy named Drew Hernandez, who's a right-leaning, but he's a streamer. He still reports the truth. He
mm,
disguises himself as Antifa, and he
mm.
puts a secret camera on himself, like a body cam, but he hides it. So he
Okay.
would get footage of stuff that they would do when they don't think anybody's looking.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he videotaped it when they are beating this white guy. Like, I'm surprised they didn't kill him. But this was all fresh in my mind right before Rittenhouse. But anyway,
Mm,
at one point, this beating, this guy is not fighting back. He's not doing anything to them. And
mm-hmm.
this guy, they're just beating the snot out of him.
Mm,
And it ends with them kicking him unconscious, and his head smacks against the concrete. Like, I literally thought they killed him the first time I watched it.
right.
Well, anyway, so then they accused Drew Hernandez of taking out of context. So he's like, well, fine, I'll upload the whole thing. 45-minute video, you get to find out that these BLM security guys were literally just walking around hunting white people to beat up. And one of them was a trans, woman that they were beating up. So
Mm,
anyway, this is what's going on in my head. I'm like, Jesus, it's getting so out of control. And Black Lives Matter wouldn't do anything about these people. Like,
right.
they don't publicly denounce that. They don't do what we did in Occupy. They don't say that's not us. And in
Mm,
fact, you kind of get the impression when you talk to them that maybe they kind of like that happened.
right. Right. Right.
They're not going to say it out loud, but a guy who says, for example, there's going to be bloodshed and riots, do you think he cares about what happened to that guy? And the
Mm,
funny thing is that white guy was just trying to de-escalate a problem. He was so meek and mild. Like, he was just trying to be a peacemaker, and he was so quiet. And anyway, my point is he wasn't a threat to anybody, and
mm-hmm.
they nearly killed him.
Right.
And so then anyway, I want to say that about weeks after that was when the Rittenhouse thing happened. But what I was thinking to myself, because when you watch that video, it's enraging to watch them do this to this guy. And so anyway, then I'm like, man, somebody is going to shoot somebody at one
Mm-hmm.
of these things. People are not going to put up with this forever. And so then I hear that kid in Kenosha killed some people, after the Jacob Blake shooting.
Mm,
And I was like, well, oh God, this is probably some crazed school shooter dude or something. And
mm,
so then I launched my investigation. I spend 2 weeks of 8 to 12 hour days hurting myself because
mm-hmm.
I have an injury to my tailbone, and I poured over hours and hours of footage, and I keep looking for the evidence of the school shooter. It's not there. There's no crazy kid. You know, everybody he fired a shot at, every single one of them attacked him. And I was like, wow. You know, and then, but what motivated me more than what happened to him was the way people were talking about it. Was they're just lying. Like, if they're on the left, then he was a white supremacist who crossed state lines with a gun illegally, who went there to shoot people. And I, you know, I would have hoped that this would have matured a little bit, but this is literally exactly what it sounds like right now too.
Right.
Over a year later, you know, and I was like, guys, you're making that up. That's not true. Like that's not true, you know. And then, you know, and not to say that the right didn't have their own version of it, but the reality is all you got to do is watch the videos and you figure it out, you know. And that was one of the things that kind of led me to believe that we have a real problem, because, and it's even worse than I thought. Like, and I'm only finding that out now, because now people are like turning on the media. They're like, well, the media, like there was this leftist actually on Twitter who recently came out and she's like, wait a minute, he didn't shoot any black people? And I was like, what? That was a year ago. You didn't know that?
Right.
You know, it's like, well, I thought for sure. I mean, I was like, yeah, well, turn off MSNBC, you twit. You know, like for me, it was a shock to find out just that it's worse than I thought. Because if you only watch the media, you're getting this ridiculous version of it. You know, that's such a caricature. It's not even close to real.
Right.
And so then anyway, I did my documentary, and then I realized as I was making it, one of the reasons I made it was that there was all these clips all over Twitter, all, you know, like little pieces of what happened. So I had to sit there and try to sequence it, because there were too many people who, if we couldn't account for where Kyle was at any given moment, they would make up stories about how he must have started a fight with this person, or he did something to those people, or, you know. So I had to just trace everything he did. And in order to do that, you have to go over hours and hours of people's cell phone streams, you know, people who don't necessarily know what they're doing when they're filming, cloudy streams. You know, like I remember once sitting through like the entire Mersado Media live stream, which is like 8 hours long, just to find a 30-second clip of Kyle walking across the street so that I can account for where he was at that moment. But the point is that that's what got me involved with Kyle, was just that people are lying, and they're lying about something that's bad, you know, and what's going to come out of it, you know. And then as I was doing that, I stumbled on the Jake Gardner case, which was another white guy during a riot, and his situation was even worse than Kyle's. But the thing is that his self-defense claim was better than Kyle's. He's outside of Omaha, you know, in Omaha during the George Floyd riots.
Right.
And he sees his father basically get laid out by somebody. Now, to be fair, his father, I guess, had shoved one of them, but then somebody just comes up and this is like a 7-year-old man, and they sent him flying. So he walks over there and he's got a pistol.
Well, a lot of these rioters, not to stop you, are good for that.
Go ahead.
They love the sneak attack.
Well,
they love the sneak attack.
Yep, that's how Antifa does anything. But or they have to outnumber you like 30-1, you know. But anyway, so he sees that, he walks over to it, and then a group of gang member like guys confront him. There's 3 of them and 1 of him. And he's like, hey, you know, what's the deal? You know, like at one point they said Black Lives Matter. He's like, well, yeah, I agree with you, but you know, what just happened to my father? And so anyway, as the conversation is going on, they start to get really aggressive, you know. And I'm like, because I grew up in the ghetto, I'm like, well, I know what they got in their mind, because they have the body language of I'm up on you, I'm going to get you. And he pulls up his shirt. He's like, look, please, I'm telling you, leave me alone. And he does everything right. He takes 6 steps backwards, to try to get away from them. And then the stupid Antifa girl jumps on his back. And yeah, like this is
what's this guy? Wait, what's this guy's name again?
Jake Gardner. You need to look into this, because it's the story it's worse than Kyle's. Well, and it has a sad ending, and I'll tell you in a second. So anyway, this Antifa chick jumps on his back. So then the ghetto dudes basically see that as their opportunity. Then they all jump on him, right? And so he pulls out his pistol and he fires 2 shots specifically to get them to leave him alone, to get him away. He didn't try to hit anybody. Then after they've run, this guy named James Scurlock was one of the last ones there. He jumps on his back again and starts choking him. And you can hear it in some of the videos where he's going, please just get off me, get off me. So then he reaches his pistol back because he feels like he's going to go out. And you don't want to go out with somebody who's going to curb stomp you, right? And he puts a bullet in this kid and he dies.
Right.
And like that's all caught on CCTV, clear video. The whole incident is available. And so initially the prosecutor clears him. They're not even going to charge him. So then Black Lives Matter has a fit. Like, he's the victim. And then, of course, what do? Well, they come out with pictures of this Scurlock kid with, a beautiful smile on his face, holding babies. And he was such a gentle kid. And he was
his fourth grade pictures.
Right. He's got prospects. Well, the problem is there's plenty of video of him just outright rioting and destroying things. So it was like, it was such nonsense. But if you listen to Black Lives Matter, it's always like that. It's their, because they, and it's not to say, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying that innocent people don't kill by the cops, obviously. And I did a whole video where I break down the statistics.
Is Django, did he die?
Oh, I didn't get to that part. So, So he got charged. Like the Black Lives Matter pressured the DA. And then they appointed a black prosecutor specifically for political reasons. And then they charge him. So here's what happens. He comes back. He was going to go back that day. And then he's in Portland. And they find his body. And they think he killed himself outside of a hospital.
Yeah, it says died by suicide in September in Oregon. Yeah.
So he's just for some reason in Portland, the Antifa murder capital of the world. I mean, they've only killed one guy, but you see what I'm saying? Like, and then he's just dead all of a sudden. He still would have had a good case, even being prosecuted. So honestly, I mean, I can't confirm it, but the whole thing doesn't seem right because I watched his interviews. Because you could still watch his hearings because he was out of state, because he went out of state because the lawyers said you need to just distance yourself from this for a little while. We'll keep track of you. So then he was coming back, and then he gets found dead. The point is that, he got demonized. They didn't just stop at prosecuting him. They pressured his business or the place where he ran his bar to terminate his lease. They destroyed his life. They took everything from him, and all he did was defend himself. And it doesn't help that he was a Trump supporter. So what does that mean? Obviously, white supremacist, fascist, like the whole line, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that is at stake here is if you want to defend your property, and Black Lives Matter and Antifa show up, they would rather you didn't. They would rather you just let them do whatever they want. You are not allowed to do anything in return. And if they choose to attack you, just submit and let them do whatever they want. That's the only way to satisfy them, which is, I might add, that guy I told you about who got kicked in the head in Portland was doing exactly that. He didn't fight them back at all. And they literally beat him unconscious.
Right.
So when they say things like, so with Kyle, the reason they're all upset is they got their asses kicked. Somebody finally stood up and did it. Somebody finally didn't. No, you're not gonna stomp me out. I'm gonna shoot back. But but more to that, one of the biggest things is that I discovered was, what is this about? What is the tension? Well, the tension was this: Black Lives Matter was there, and the militant group within that group of Black Lives Matter protesters, many of which I might add, drove across state lines. Literally well over 100 rioters were arrested from out of state in Kenosha.
Right. Absolutely.
Nobody talks about that. So anyway, at first the conflict was that an armed group of people showed up, and this was like the second or third day in Kenosha. I think it's the second, because they burned down like 3 businesses, including like a Mexican immigrant owned, ice cream shop. They attacked the dinosaur children's museum, just stuff that doesn't make any sense. Like, what are you doing? So anyway, an armed group of people who live near there, like one guy, and I actually had him on my show recently, he puts out the call, like, does anybody want to come help protect businesses? Because the cops were ordered to stand down, is what the rumor was.
Let me interject here one second.
Go ahead.
Mark Becker said, and the police just did nothing. And that's because, and I was a part of that. We were being told by our superiors, your politicians, your mayors, your city councilmen, we work for them. We were being told by them to stand down. We were being told that if we went in there and broke up these situations, these riots, these rowdy protests, that it would further escalate things. So just let them get let them get it out their system. Let them release that energy. That's what we were told. So a lot of people are looking the fact that across this country, police officers weren't stopping these rioters. They just don't seem to understand that police have to follow instructions. And
Right.
if our bosses, if our politicians tell us not to do something, then we can't do it. And social unrest is that gray area where you can say whether you want to enforce it or not.
And that, right. And
Mhm.
that's, I got because there's a streamer from Kenosha who was pretty angry at me because of the video I did that you featured.
Mhm.
Because actually I originally just uploaded the first part to share it. And then he got on me and is like, you're doing rhetoric and all that. Anyway, he's a Kenosha, like Antifa based, like journalist. His channel's called Never Stop Voices. And he cussed me out on his stream because I shared that. So then I made the version that you watched, which was me going, oh, okay. So you're telling me I don't know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I dropped a huge truth bomb on him the size of 50 megatons.
Right.
But the point is that he's like, well, it's the cops' fault. You guys never talk about them. They didn't do enough to stop the riots. And I was like, dude, if they did what was necessary, then you'd be making videos about police brutality.
Absolutely. Because you can't go in there without cracking skulls. Not literally, hopefully not. You know what I mean? But
Well,
you're
yeah,
going to
if
be
they don't want to
arresting people.
leave.
Yeah,
Did
you're
you
going to be
see the
arresting
video
people.
of a dude with an AR-15 shooting at a bear cat?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I can show that to you. I might even
How's
be able
he
to play
not
it for you.
dead?
Because they didn't want to confront them. Like
Jesus
basically what
Christ.
happens is Bearcat pulls up and BLM and Kenosha decides they're going to stop the cops from going. And so this dude is with them, white guy with an AR-15. That's the other thing is like the Black Lives Matter protesters in Kenosha were a lot of them were armed
Yes,
with
absolutely.
firearms.
Yeah.
And it's like this dude is a nutcase.
Right.
He stands down this Bearcat. He's got his AR-15 and low ready, and then he literally lines himself up like he's moving tactically because the vehicle stops and they think they're going to get out. So I'm like, what the hell does this guy think he's going to do? Just start popping off cops on their way out of this Bearcat, And then as the Bearcat finally, like they throw gas because they're trying to get away, they're trying to get out of there without to hurt anybody. And then this dude starts popping shots at this Bearcat with his AR-15. Nobody talks about that. That was not the Kenosha Guard. That was not Kyle Rittenhouse. That was Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So anyway, back to like the beginning of the chronology of the thing. So they were just at that point running rampant, running roughshod, doing whatever they wanted because the Kenosha police were basically ordered, that is my understanding, ordered to stand down. The police recently talked during a trial and said that they didn't have the correct number. Basically, they didn't have the resources to stop this riot. If it was just citizens from Kenosha, ironically, they probably could have.
Right.
But it was literally over 100 people, and that's just the ones who were arrested. Because remember, they're not arresting a lot of them. So the point is there were a whole lot of people who crossed state lines, which I put in quotes, who were there to burn the city. They weren't there to protect the city. They didn't cross state lines to protect the city.
Yeah.
They came over there to burn the city, and they hurt a lot of people's lives that way. So anyway, Kenosha Guard was basically an effort by somebody to form like a local guard just to be able to try to protect businesses. And so people answered the call. Kyle Rittenhouse was one of those people. Along with a lot of others. Now, when he originally come to Kenosha that day, it was to clean up like the riot. He didn't because like the issue of the call to try to help wasn't brought out yet. Then eventually they meet these guys from the car source who have since lied and said that they didn't ask them for help, but that's kind of obviously been proven to be under scrutiny. But these guys are Indian.
And I think they're lying for liability issues, basically.
No, and I'm sure that's probably what it is too.
Yeah.
The only reason it's a problem is that like a young kid's life is in the balance.
Absolutely.
It's like
they don't give a damn.
Well, right. But the point is that these are two Indian immigrants. So the supposedly white supremacist group of armed men showed up to protect a person of color's business because that makes sense. So anyway, there was a tension at some point. First of all, you can tell that Black Lives Matter resented that they were there because now they didn't just have free reign to just destroy whatever they wanted to. And their initial interactions with them were, hey, we support what you're doing. We don't like police brutality, but, can you not burn stuff, you know, and they were like, so it was this uneasy thing. And so what ended up happening was at some point, for example, the argument actually started initially because there were some Bearcats nearby because they kept moving the protesters around to try to keep them away from, whatever they were doing that would destroy the businesses. So they start throwing rocks and bottles at this Bearcat. And that's actually what started the initial argument with that Kenosha guard. Because they're like, hey, don't do that. What are you doing? So Black Lives Matter is like, no, you're not going to tell us what to do. It's typical. Don't tell us how to protest. So that's what began the tensions. And then the Black Lives Matter people, who at that point were used to being the angry mob with the monopoly on force, were upset that there was this group of mostly white men. And that's the other thing. There was a black guy in their group. That's not usually talked about. But anyway, who are not allowing them to destroy the city. That's what they were fighting about. Like when people talk about, well, you put yourself in that situation, you caused problems and, you provoked them. We provoked them by doing what? Well, here's what the next step was. And this is where Joseph Rosenbaum comes into the story.
Right.
Is that they lit a dumpster on fire and then they started pushing it at a gas station. And so the armed guys go up and they just with a fire extinguisher, they put the fire out. If you watch my documentary, which, mind you, parts of my documentary are now kind of obsolete because the trial has revealed things that we didn't have access to. But you still get the timeline. Well, anyway, what erupted after they put out that dumpster fire, if those men were not armed, they'd have ended up like that guy in Portland. They'd have all been just stomped into the ground. Yeah. Because there was probably a good 60 or so Black Lives Matter protesters there. And they all got up in their faces, yelling and screaming. Like one of them was like, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Like their dumpster fire was so important to them. And that's why literally the first chapter is called It All Started with a Dumpster Fire, to point out how ridiculous this is. We are arguing about a dumpster fire. And the exchange that went on, like this one guy thought like he was Ice Cube or something from Boys in the Hood because he racks his pistol looking all hard. And, and then another one has another pistol. And then they start throwing things at the armed people. Thankfully, some people in the group said, okay, this is not a good idea. You need to back off. And so they went somewhere else to try to burn things. The point is that the reason for the conflict was that there was this group of people that were preventing them from burning stuff. Right. That's what that's about. That's what they were mad about. There was no racism. There was no white supremacy. There was none of that. It was, please don't burn our goddamn city down. We live here. Do you? And in many cases, no, they didn't. And that was actually what the black gentleman who was with them said. He's like, you all want to burn shit, but we have to live here. That was what he was conflicting with them about, because they were yelling at him like, how dare you be with them? Right. So in any case, when I started to see what the conflict was about, was one of the things that motivated me, in addition to the fact that there were all these tiny little clips all over Twitter of little pieces from people's phones. Like they might upload 12 seconds at a time, And so I just was like, this is too much. It's all over the place to try to talk about the situation. So that's when I decided I need to put them in some kind of chronological order, specifically about where Kyle Rittenhouse was at any given moment, and also to explain what his motives were. Right. And the absolutely asinine notion that he was there to kill people is debunked in like the first 20 minutes of my footage, because he gave medical attention to anybody who needed it, including Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, mind you, he wasn't qualified to do more than first aid. It doesn't change the fact that if that's what he was there to do, he would have killed people. And the funny thing is, there's a scene in particular, one of the Black Lives Matter protesters pepper sprayed him, and his eyes are watering. And he's being interviewed. He's like, and I just got pepper sprayed by somebody in the crowd. And as they're talking, somebody needed medical help. And he literally, with his eyes still watering from pepper spray, went over and wrapped this Black Lives Matter member's ankle because she had been shot, I guess, in the ankle by a rubber bullet. So that's what he's there supposedly to do, is that he's a racist, white supremacist, Trump, evil guy who literally, after being pepper sprayed by this group, went and gave one of them medical attention. So people they're still creating a narrative that's utterly false. There's nothing true about it. Do I think that Kyle Rittenhouse was wise? No. I mean, I wouldn't want my son to do what he did, but He was not motivated by racism. There is zero evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a fascist. Yes, he was friendly with police and he was a police cadet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure you can imagine when they get pictures of him being a police cadet,
Mm-hmm.
that's all some of these people need. Well, he must be a fascist,
Absolutely.
racist, and so, but that's where I realized I need to do this project because it was too hard to communicate with people about this because everything was out of sequence. And so basically it was like putting together a collage. And I say it's like a collage because I felt like I was clipping out of 300 newspapers to tell a story all about the
Right.
same subject,
Right.
And the first time I did it, the sound wasn't very good, but all the sequence of events was accounted for, so it was important that people understood the truth of the situation. And then in addition to that, how crazy this Rosenbaum guy was,
Yeah.
and that's what he was angry about. He was one of the people pushing the dumpster fire,
Right.
And it's
I
also
have
important.
no love for Rosenbaum. I mean, to the point where I had to check myself because I was being ultra biased against him for the fact of the crimes that he committed against children.
Well,
I
yes.
feel like there shouldn't even be a trial for him.
Well, and what's messed up is one of my panelists said the other day, he wasn't even a Black Lives Matter guy.
No, he wasn't.
Literally had just wandered out of a mental institution.
Yeah, his girl in a documentary I saw. I don't know if it was a documentary or just like a long format, like news kind of segment on YouTube or whatever. But the girlfriend was interviewed and she was like, she asked him like, what are you going down there for? Like, you don't have nothing to do with that stuff. And he's kind of like, yeah, I'm just gonna go see what's going on, like he just wanted to be a part of that negative anarchist energy because he was a very troubled person himself.
Well, yeah, and it's easy. The reason that I included the information about their criminal histories, and I made this clear, this isn't relevant per se to what's going on. The reason I put that information in there is because people were lying. They were saying that Rosenbaum hadn't done any of those things. In fact, I still run into people. You can hear the lack of patience who say that Rosenbaum was not a pedophile. So one of the other things that happened is
facts, man. This is stuff you could get off the internet. Like, come on.
Right. Well, if they did any due diligence and they didn't. Now, early on, this stuff was harder to find. So because of, my background, like Anonymous and 4chan was leaking me information. And one of the things they leaked me was they were trying to figure out the identity of the first shooter. Now, mind you, most people were not even talking about Joshua Zeminski at this point or any role that he had in what took place. But this is a guy with a 7-page long criminal record who was going by an alias, Alex Blaine. 4chan and Anonymous figured out who he was, and they just started feeding me stuff because they saw some of my earlier videos. And so that's when we discovered, no, he's not Alex Blaine. That's an alias because he couldn't get a job with his real name. And then he had like a 7-page criminal history, and anyway, that was an example of one of the things that came up. Well, he's the one who fired that first shot that started everything off.
Right.
So to get back to the chronology, just so you understand, Kyle was not present for the dumpster fire.
Right.
He was at a different building, but he had an olive green shirt that looked identical to somebody at the dumpster fire incident. And so it is my belief that Rosenbaum probably misidentified him as that person. Now, Rosenbaum, according to Ryan Balch, did threaten the whole group and say, if I get one of you alone, I'm going to kill you. Which I believe it fits every piece of this guy's behavior. The prosecutor today tried to say, well, there's no video of that. And I'm like, yeah, we're lucky that we just happen to have video of everything else that happened that night.
Absolutely.
When did we suddenly decide that video was a requirement for evidence?
Right.
I mean, Jesus, we've only had video. I mean, our laws are older than video cameras, and they're certainly older than the time period when everybody has one in their pocket.
Well, justice system has gotten lazy. It's all about video and DNA. That's why in this case they had to really educate the jury to understand that, like, look, you can clearly see two of these, well, at least one of these people touching the weapon. That'd be Anthony Huber. So no DNA was found on the gun, but he did touch it, So, it's getting real lazy. But go ahead.
So anyway, then Kyle at some point gets separated from his group, and they ask him to go to a different location. And one of the things that it really frustrates me about discussing the violence goes on at these protests is the theory that supposedly this is all actually white supremacists in disguise who go and break cars and destroy things. They don't take any credit for it of ever happening at the hands of Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we have a parking lot literally full of black people breaking cars, and it's like, yeah, look at all the white supremacists out there, like, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does. I've got a video of a
it does happen.
breaking
It
windows in Minneapolis.
It definitely does happen, but I can tell you from somebody who looks at the intel that it doesn't happen as much as the media likes to make it seem like it happens.
Well, right. And in addition to that, it doesn't so I got video of that guy from Minneapolis who broke the windows and, at the AutoZone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get the entire city of Minneapolis off the hook for everything they did after that.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, I saw a guy break a window at an AutoZone. Let me head down to Target and get myself a flat screen TV. Yeah. Like, that's the way they act. Well, no,
other people instigated it. Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
Kyle gets to the car source. Like, this is a fast forward, but basically Rosenbaum watches Kyle walk by himself to this other car source, and then he kind of positions himself. He shoots ahead, sets himself up for an ambush behind one of the trucks. And this Zeminski guy was there too with his wife. And so they basically set him up. He walks up with a fire extinguisher because he had heard that they were going to be setting cars on fire at the car source. He got his fire extinguisher in his left hand, gun in his right hand. New video proves that he puts the fire extinguisher down and he has his gun in his hand. If you would follow the prosecution, somehow the gun teleports from his right hand to his left hand. Because they have this grainy photo that they're using. What we call it is hocus pocus out of focus is what they call it now. But it literally looks like Pitfall Harry from Atari 2600 with a gun. It's not in any way legible. But the point is that eventually what happens here is that Rosenbaum jumps behind and screams at Kyle, sets him off, and he starts running, starts chasing him. And then Kyle hears a gunshot behind him from Joshua Zeminski. Joshua's not shooting at him, he's shooting in the air. But he knew what he was up to because they're just sauntering along like they're heading down the street to buy a Subway sub or something after they fire this gun. Meanwhile, everybody else is screaming and running for their lives. Kyle gets to the edge of an area where he doesn't feel like he can go any further. Rosenbaum's almost on top of him. He hears that gunshot, and then Kyle turns and he fires and takes out Rosenbaum with 4 shots. Now, the prosecution keeps doing this thing where they try to compress and stretch time. So in this instance, they're stretching time. They say, well, he fired 4 shots. Why didn't he stop after the first one? Rosenbaum fell and he shot him in the back. So they're creating this narrative to suggest that something that actually happened, according to the experts, in 0.7 seconds. When they tell the story, you would think it was more like 5 or 6. Like Kyle shoots him once, Rosenbaum falls, and then he ponders it for a moment and shoots him in the back, which is not what happened at all.
Where does prosecutorial misconduct come in? Because from my understanding, the prosecutor is not supposed to lie like this. And we've observed this prosecutor blatantly lie, massage, and twist the truth to try and just make a narrative that doesn't exist. What do you think about that?
Well, it's the thing of it is that honestly, a lot of it was kind of already there, which is what the YouTuber Just Some Guy said about it. Just Some Guy's another black gentleman, but he's like conservative leaning, but he's telling the left, he's like, look, here's your opportunity to show the right what's wrong with the justice system. You have a corrupt prosecutor. Why don't you take that opportunity to teach people about what your problem is instead of spending a bunch of time blaming white supremacy or this or that? Because you can bet if he's lied about Kyle, he's got to have lied about other people. And that's one of the other problems is during the course of this case, it was revealed there was a guy that they had in there making a statement. And so they're trying to get some more stuff on Joshua Zeminski. So the prosecutor points to the picture and says, do you know who that man is? And the guy goes, no, this is a photographer that was a witness. He's like, well, that's Joshua Zeminski. He's like, okay. And then he looks at him and says, would you like to amend your statement? As in he suggests to the guy, hey, will you say that you saw Joshua Zeminski? Just absolutely total, judicial, you can't do that, right?
Right.
And so then the guy got a lawyer because he's like, something's not right here, because he felt like he was being pressured.
Right.
You know, so and then that's just one of the many things he lied about. What are they going to do about it? Well, that's the problem. If yeah, actually, if you look in there, that article, if it is what I think, you'll see my name in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
because my video was used to arrest him.
Oh
He
really?
actually, yeah,
Wow.
he actually came to my channel and commented on my video and argued with me for about 5 or 6 pages. I think if you scroll down, you'll see
Wow.
Neil Kiernan, a Michigan-based blogger. I think you might have to go up again. It
Go
should
up a
be
little
on
bit.
there. Go up a little bit.
Uh-huh.
So if I'm looking at it, oh, I need to look at it on StreamYard. Okay, so somewhere on there it'll say video put
Right.
together by Neil Kiernan, a Michigan-based blogger.
Right.
Well, anyway, the point is that I that got submitted to them, and so they finally tracked him down.
Right.
But
Right.
but as far as the malpractice, it's insane, and nobody's doing anything about it,
Right.
and it doesn't look like anything will happen.
Mm-mm.
And he's
No.
still in the middle of this, and he's a prosecutor.
Right.
I think that I would say that, you know, it definitely paints a picture that we need to do something about this. There needs to be ways to hold these people accountable.
Right. So, what do you think about the closing arguments?
Well, for one thing, it's been a while since I've watched a trial, but
Mm-hmm.
geez, dude, that whole situation, because you're only allowed to do so much because you can't object. So Banger just gets up there and just flat out lies.
Mm.
So, for example, one of the videos that I just did, in fact, I just dropped it right before I got on with you,
Mm.
was that there's a moment where they're trying to say that Rosenbaum was never around Kyle, like before that, to try to debunk this theory that Rosenbaum threatened to kill Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, now, I'm going to debunk this threat right now because I'm going to prove to you that Rosenbaum was never there. You know, and so he plays a clip. It's a good 10-minute clip. And I know where Rosenbaum is at the moment because I made this movie. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
literally going crazy with my mouse, hoping to point to my audience where he's going to be. And I was like, Jesus, he clipped this perfectly because I know Rosenbaum's like 10 feet to the left, you know.
Mm.
And
And
I
you're
got,
referring to the whole situation where they're talking about whether Cal is behind Rosenbaum or Rosenbaum,
yeah,
pretty much.
yeah.
Got you.
Well, the point is that he played a video knowing full well that Rosenbaum was not in that clip and that he's in it 3 seconds afterwards. And
Mm.
he told the jury, I'm playing the entire clip. He's
Mm.
lied, point blank lied. And you know, to the defense attorney's credit, because I panicked, like I literally called the office and stuff because I've submitted stuff to them, and of course, because they're in trial, aren't going to answer the phone. Because
Right.
like I knew where to get that video, and I didn't know if they had it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way that the video processing happens for these people is that usually they don't want to hear from us. They'll take whatever we have, but they don't want to hear our analysis. To be fair to them, they're probably inundated with crazies all the time. The point is that I knew where he was standing at that moment. So then I put together a clip of it. Thankfully, they had it already. But, so the defense was able to open up in his closing statement with, "You've just been bold-faced lied to," and bang.
Mm.
Here's a picture of Joseph Rosenbaum standing right in the situation that he claimed that he wasn't there.
Right.
So the reason I bring that up, there's
Mhm.
actually a funny moment because earlier on in the trial, Binger, first of all, did something you're not allowed to do. He stated, he mentioned that Kyle had used his right to remain silent. This is
Should have been a mistrial. Absolutely should have been a mistrial.
right. You are not allowed to do this. And that's the funny thing is they keep saying this judge is biased.
No.
The problem with this situation is like, you have kids, like you have two kids perhaps,
Mm.
let's say one of them misbehaves a lot and the other one doesn't. Well, the
Yeah,
one who misbehaves a lot is going to tell you that you favor the other one.
that's right.
When the truth is, yeah, because you're constantly misbehaving. And that's what
Mhm.
I'm watching during the course of this trial. Binger screws himself over and over and over again. But I would say his incentive to misbehave is because of the fact that there's nothing. They don't have a case.
Mhm.
And that's why he was desperately trying to do things like, let's get this picture that's allegedly with the Proud Boys in. Let's talk about what the Proud Boys are. That got
Mhm.
blocked. Let's bring up a video of Kyle getting into a fight with a girl, leaving out, of course, the notion that Kyle's little sister is like 3 feet shorter than this girl, and this girl started beating up on his sister, and so that's why he gets involved. And I'm not saying
Mhm.
that it's perfect. The point is that they were going to take that out of context. And then they get this video, which I'm fairly convinced that the only reason they got it is because Dominic Black is also being prosecuted. So he basically ratted on his friend. But they're watching a CVS being looted, which I'm
Right.
sure you've seen is a real problem right now.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he says in it, man, I wish I had my AR-15. I'd fire some rounds at them. He was obviously a kid just talking crap.
Talking smack. Everybody has done it. Everybody.
Right. And then Binger points out, well, he did do something. He called the police, as if he was trying to frame it like this is evidence that Kyle is racist because he called the police on black people, right?
Who are looting a CVS.
Right. Very obviously looting a CVS. The point is that got blocked too. So the extreme left feels that this judge is super biased and this is a terrible case and all this other crap because he's not giving them anything they want.
You think they're going to use him as a scapegoat if Kyle is not guilty?
The judge?
Yep.
They've already started that. I mean, that's already what the media is saying. He's their scapegoat for all of it, if only not for this judge, right? The thing is that, and this is what started to happen at one point because they were trying to humanize Anthony Huber and make him out to be this great guy. And so the defense was like, hey, if we're going to go down this road, I got a lot to say about Mr. Huber. And that was the funny thing is that I thought I knew a lot about this case. They started reading off all the things Anthony Huber did. I knew what the charges were because we got a hold of his record. I didn't have the police reports. That guy took a knife and put it to his brother's throat and said, if you don't clean this room, I'm going to gut you like a pig. He threatened to burn his grandmother's house down. He choked it was either his sister or something he choked somebody else. Right. Cause it was like,
sister. And he would force the grandmother to clean as well.
Right.
It's like she was cleaning under the threat of violence as well.
Right. So this is the nutcase that they're trying to paint out. It's like, so then all of a sudden the prosecutor gets really sheepish and they just withdraw because they don't want to get into that. So it's like the left thinks that if we brought, and I'm going to again clarify the woke, far crazy left feels that the trial would go differently if we brought up these other things. But I'm like, okay, well, we can also talk about Joseph Rosenbaum.
Right.
Joseph Rosenbaum raped 5 boys between the ages of 9 and 11. Forced sodomy, forced oral sex. This is not like he just touched them a little bit. This is evil. And okay, we can talk about that then. We can talk about Zeminski. Well, what kind of person is he? He's got a 7-page long, everybody involved with that was actually, ironically, I had a black friend who goes to these things and he just kind of quietly listens. And I asked him some questions. And one of them was, I asked him about, so who do you run into who wants to abolish the police? And he said, generally 2 different types of people. I'm like, well, who are they? He's like, well, first, people who are utterly naive about crime.
Absolutely.
Like have no idea what they're talking about. He's like, he said, they think they know the hood because they might have driven through my neighborhood once to go to a club or a concert. He's like, they've never seen gunshots. They don't know what a drive-by is. They've never been to a crack house, and this is a guy that is trying to he and I became friends because he saw me talking on Facebook and some people were telling me to shut up because I was white. And then he was being like, I was like, no, you shut up. Right. But the point is that then I said, so what is the other group? Criminals. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, as in people I grew up with that are lifelong criminals.
Yep.
He's like, that's the other group that wants to abolish the police. And he said that, if we ever gave them what they wanted, they just take the power vacuum. That's, so anyway,
that guy's a really wise guy. like for real, like he gets it. He gets it. He totally gets it.
Well, it happened is that his motive was that there was a drive-by where his cousin got killed in his front lawn. And his little sister was sitting outside. So as a consequence, she gets triggered when she hears screeching tires. And then he lost like a brother-in-law who got shot at a club. So to him, he's like, look, I'm not saying the police are perfect, but I've lost 2 family members. Neither of them were killed by police.
And see, this is what I talk about on my show, because the black folks who are asking for the abolition of police or whatever, the abolishment of the police, they're uppity black folks. Like you said, who've never been in a hood, never experienced this type of violence. And then you have their white allies, these, upper middle class college students or whatever, these white folks suffering from white guilt that are basically helping perpetuate this narrative. And I say it all the time. People from the hood want more cops. The only thing they want is to be respected. So when I was growing up in Harlem and NYPD was coming and harassing me and all this stuff and stopping frisking me, I never once said I don't want cops here. I always just said I just want these cops to respect me, because when you're in the hood, you know who your true enemy is. And unfortunately, and I'm going to get flack for saying this, but your true enemy is the people who look like you. Those are the ones who are going to rob you, rape you, murder you, not the cops. And when they do it, it's very rare. So maybe you can name 1 or 2 cops that did it in the last 5-10 years, but you can name thousands of people in your community who've done it. And that's the disconnect. And that's what pisses me off so much. But go ahead, continue.
No, that's the thing that bothers me too, because they're talking like they understand this problem and they don't. And the reality is like, and I look at it a little bigger picture. So for example, the FBI has reported that the cartel has taken special interest in Seattle. Why? Defunded police.
Right.
They know that they'll have an easier time there. And when we come to the kids who are ignorant about crime, who don't know anything about, say, organized crime, they don't know what'll happen. Well, what'll happen is same thing that happened in Mexico. The cartel is so powerful in Mexico that when they finally arrested El Chapo's son, the cartel launched a military-style assault on the Mexican government, and their president had to let him go. Like, people talk about the militarized police. I usually show them a picture of the cartel, because the cartel drives around in armored vehicles, has weapons, like that. They look like special forces troops, and then that's the cartel.
It's crazy.
And it was like, you guys think you're going to stand up to that? That was an excellent example. Like, as I was arguing with some Antifa, I got into one of their secret groups from before, and they're telling me, like, one of them's like the thread was, how do we, deal with people who feel that defunding the police is not working? And then one of them, who's more militant, it's like, well, we shouldn't be defunding. We need to abolish. And I just kind of quietly said, so what are you going to replace it with? Well, nothing. And I'm like, oh, okay, so how's that going to work out? And I said, so when the cartel shows up to fill the power vacuum, what are you going to do? And they're like, well, do you think we Antifa militants are just going to stand down?
But you're not fucking tough. You're not fucking tough. You have empathy. These folks don't have empathy.
Right. And they don't understand that people like that exist, and they don't want to believe it. But they have a huge overinflated sense of how effective they are. And that was the part that really, really bothered me, was like, because they've been allowed to do what they've been allowed to do, they think they're hard. They think they're capable. They think, like, I got into an argument with one of them once that said, he's like, well, we've been fighting the most militarized police force. I'm like, you're not fighting the cops. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, why do you think you're fighting the cops? He's like, this is a war. I was in Fallujah. I know what war looks like. I'm like, okay, so how many Taliban lined up across from you with plastic shields and stood there while you launched insults and water bottles at them and just let you do it? I was like, I'm like, you're full of shit, dude.
And then you're going to CCRB them later.
Right. It's like, and they don't even know what it would be like, because like, we haven't even started on, say, the water cannons,
right?
Like just the normal or proactive use of billy clubs, like old school, the crap that would happen to Martin Luther King and his people, like that kind of level of police violence. They hadn't even close to seen it yet. And now we're not even talking about, say, the microwave cannon yet, which sounds like sci-fi, but they perfected it like a while ago, and it just makes like a whole area like the size of a football field. People that are in it feel like they're on fire. Like, the police haven't even tried to fight them yet.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not allowed to. And so unfortunately they think that this means they're winning. Like with the Chaz Chop thing, one of the worst things about it was that it was allowed to happen, because it emboldened them to make them think, well, if we just keep doing this, we'll win. Absolutely. They have no sense of where that goes, where that leads. And I hate to say it, but I honestly think that they're being allowed to do this because this is the effect that I'm noticing. Moderate Republicans who would have been aghast at the notion of, say, draconian, like, government police showing up and grabbing people and shipping them off to, some secret prison somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
are now slowly starting to become like, get these people off the streets. I don't care how you got to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like letting them get away with this is causing public opinion. First of all, Black Lives Matter's reputation is in the trash. And
Absolutely.
then, yeah. And then people want Antifa dealt with, but they're just they continue to try to ignore Antifa and pretend they don't exist, which is the part that bothers me. We talked about that a little bit off the air, but that's a new phenomenon. When we were in Occupy, we weren't pretending that they didn't exist. And even in left-wing media, they would refer to Antifa. And you can see interviews with Antifa, the thing that supposedly doesn't exist. They're still on YouTube. Usually around 2017 was when suddenly it was like there was this widespread media order to pretend that the Antifa doesn't exist. And it's bullshit. And when you go hang out with them, they openly talk about what they're about.
Right.
They feel that if they can topple society, that this new anarcho-communist, utopia will arise. And what's really funny about it is that among actual anarcho-communists who have a brain, because I talk to them, they think this is stupid. Because if you're trying to convince people that they don't need a state and they don't need police, the best way to go about that would not be to walk around as a roving gang beating on people that you don't agree with and destroying their property. That is an extremely poor strategy to convince people that they don't need police.
Right.
Like, it's ridiculous. So, in all though, I'm happy that I met you, because like, I'm glad, we'll have somebody else talk about this. Definitely want to expose you to my streamers as well.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah,
but the point is that what I'd like to see is that people who lean left and understand the things you and I are talking about need to band together. The ones who have the spine to be willing to come forward and say things. Because like, one of the things that I noticed when I was making the documentary was that there are leftists who would come to me privately and say, thank you for making that. You've changed my mind. But publicly talking about supporting the idea that Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent is blasphemous. We need to create a base where people who think like us interact with each other and make a movement of us, like sensible, non-head up their butts, left-leaning people. We have to take this back, because they're still trying to bully that way. Like, I just had to deal with one of them in my stream today. Like, you're not leftist because you don't agree with this. I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? No, you guys are trying to make that a requirement of the left. It's not. It's your stupid, radical, ridiculous kind of crap. And the other thing is that the damage that they're doing to our credibility, all of the benefit. Okay, so Bernie Sanders was able to accomplish a lot to get people to start thinking about healthcare, to get people to start thinking about some of these programs. And he was doing it in a way that he was starting to win people over. Like, I knew Trump supporters who would have voted for Bernie if Hillary didn't get nominated.
Right.
And we made all this progress. And now we got these militant anarchist communists walking around with flags from Stalin and Mao. And, don't even get me started on how stupid that is. But, the point is that now it's all sliding back.
Right.
Any advantage that we had gotten through what Bernie had accomplished is gone. Because now the left is angry people destroying cities and beating up people for things that have nothing to do with them. Like,
Absolutely.
that's a perfect example that I think you will like. In Los Angeles, LA Antifa thought they were hard because they beat up some soccer moms who were outside the Wii Spa, because of the trans person who was there. And like, so LA Antifa showed up in force. And they were lucky that day because they totally outnumbered the protesters. And most of these people were they weren't right-wingers. They weren't Proud Boys. Some of them might have been right-wingers. But the point is that their problem was it had to do with the trans person exposing themselves. And they said, well, that's not true. But even if it was, it should have been allowed anyway. So somehow Antifa shows up there and they beat the crap out of a bunch of people. And they violently, like, they hurt journalists who were not right or left. They were just local people. Well, anyway. And this is the call out that I gave them, because I interact with some of them on Twitter. I said, if you guys are so goddamn concerned about trans people, head on over to MacArthur Park, where MS-13 owns the park, and they just stabbed a trans person in the throat like 2 months ago, and they murdered trans people the previous year.
Yeah.
If that's what you're about, head on over there. And they won't.
Of course not.
because MS-13 will kill them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In front of the cops.
Right, exactly. Right. No, so
Mm.
it's all fiction. It's all nonsense.
The funny thing is with that story, though, I mean, you go a little further, we come to find out that that guy's actually a sex offender.
Right. It was real the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was real the whole time.
And he
So
uses the trans umbrella to get access to places like that so that he can flash women and engage in lewd behavior, which he's been cited by the law for before. It's disgusting. It's horrible.
right. Well, and the point of it was that I don't hate trans people, nor do I think that they are more inclined to be pedophiles. I've had a trans
Of course
roommate.
not.
My
Hmm.
kids have been watched by trans people, but even the trans
Yeah.
people I talk to acknowledge that, first of all, if you're pre-op trans, you shouldn't be exposing yourself to other people. And secondly,
Hmm.
they agreed with me that it could be a means by which pedophiles would get access to children.
Right.
So that's not on trans people. That's on them just finding a way to be able to abuse the benefits that trans people are looking for.
Well, they
But
do that anyway. I mean, they'll go to be a priest. As we saw that with, the Catholic Church. It's not that Catholic priests are pedophiles. It's that pedophiles realize, oh my God, I can get into this community and I can get access to children if I decide to be a priest. It's the same thing.
right, exactly.
Mhm.
And so, you know, what also bothers me is that when you watch the video of these Antifa brutally beating up these people,
Mhm.
that's going to cause people to want to hurt trans people. That's going to
Mm.
cause transphobia. That's going to actually harm the trans movement.
Mhm.
In the same way that Black Lives Matter, like I talked to the leader of the Nazi party because he has a blog talk radio show and he'll just let
Right.
anybody call in. And I was like,
Mhm.
what do you think about this? He's like, oh, this is great.
Mm.
People are going to learn the truth now about people of color. They're going to learn about how evil they are, and like,
Yeah.
oh, Jesus. I was like,
Because
exactly.
when you're a group and you go out there like that, people assume that you represent the entire demographic.
Right.
So, Eric Adams won the New York City mayor race from a broad coalition of all different types of races, but especially from the Black and Latino community in the poorest parts of the city. He overwhelmingly won, the votes in those areas because people are afraid of crime. People are concerned about crime.
Right.
So now you hear this guy Newsom, as we spoke about before, coming up saying, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you do the very thing that people want, the return of this plain clothes unit that's able to pull guns off the street. If you do what the people want, we're going to burn this place down. We're going to have violence. We're going to have bloodshed. So somebody who's watching it, and we got to admit it, that most people are low. They just don't have a lot of information. The low information people, they might watch a clip of that on a ideological channel like Fox News or whatever, and now they'll assume, oh, that's all black people. All black people agree with that. And the fact
Right.
is, this is not the truth.
No, and they will portray it as if it
Mhm.
is all Black people who feel
Yeah,
that way. And
right.
it's nonsense. Like, that's the
Mhm.
thing is that, and that's why, like, I mean, a Gallup poll was
Mhm.
done and very clearly showed that Black people wanted more cops.
Absolutely.
And so they're just lying.
Yeah.
And if you let them do it and nobody will challenge them because they don't want to perceive to be racist, they don't like that was the major thing is that now we're getting to the point. Like, there was a point when I said, if the world was as racist as you're saying it is, then nobody would care about
Mhm.
being called racist. And because it would be accepted. And like, there was a point actually, and Daryl Davis agreed with me about this, but there was a moment towards the end of the Obama administration, I think, when the Ku Klux Klan was so pathetic that they were literally, first of all, talking about getting racism out of their platform. And some of the chapters were even talking about letting people of color join. And it was going to become like a workers' movement, like, just for poor people in general. Now, that's how pathetic racism was in this country.
Right.
Then we start burning stuff down and being apprehensive, like, going after white people. And
Mhm.
now all of a sudden there's a surge of racism. It's
Mm.
still not as big of a deal as they're saying it is,
Right.
but it's a deal, but it's
Yeah.
being made worse. Like,
Right.
that's at the core of what the problem with that Daryl Davis was trying to explain to Black Lives Matter is. If
Right.
you do this, you first of all, this is like one of the key things. I'm like, okay, so your concern is that you don't want your people to be profiled as violent criminals.
Mm.
So your response to that is to go behave like violent criminals.
Mm.
like which just doesn't help. That's what the Nazi I talked to said. He's like, when they go out and destroy their own cities, they're just proving the truth about themselves, which mind you is what he thinks is the truth.
Right, right.
But my point is that I'm like, Jesus, he's so right, because they're basically just going out and literally they're putting on the costume
right
that these racists make and going out and performing for them exactly the way the racists would want them to.
right
And if
right
we don't like it, we're told that we're the racists.
right
And you can't reason with them. And when you try to tell them the truth, they'll say, well, Martin Luther King got shot. We can't keep doing what he did. We need to rise up. We need to do, and it doesn't work.
right
Like, that's why. Go ahead.
He got shot, and his legacy is now has me on this live with you.
Right. Well, and that's what, like, so the thing is that, like, especially because that New York BLM guy just went on Dan Bargani. I can't remember his name. He's got like an Italian name, but he had him on. He's like, will you denounce riots? And he just kept evading the question. And then he finally just said, no, I will not condemn riots. Well, here's the problem. That means you're not on Martin Luther King's team.
That's right.
Because he did say that riots are the language of the unheard, but he predicated that on riots are not useful. They cause social destruction and more problems than they help. Like, I just played the whole video for them because they keep saying, well, he said riots are the language of the unheard. Now cue the word salad where I try to find some way to justify and pretend that these are all okay. No, he said you have to condemn riots as vigorously as you condemn the systemic problems that you feel are causing poverty. Right. And they're not doing that. If anything, they're doing the opposite. And it's not helping.
Wow. Well, let me throw in a quick promo real quick, and then I'm going to ask you one final question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because I have work in the morning.
No, we've been at this quite a while, man.
Absolutely, man.
Just promise to come on my show later, though. That'd be great.
Oh, yeah, man. I'm definitely going to be a guest on your show, and if you're willing, I definitely like to have you as a part of the Strategiceyes family and collaborate more often with you. So first of all, guys, please hit that like button. We've been stagnant at like 26 likes. Please hit that like button. If you're in a room and you're watching this compelling conversation, take the time to just hit that like button. Help us with that algorithm. If you're watching this streaming and you're coming from V Radio's channel, or you're just popping in because you saw the title, please consider subscribing to the Strategiceyes show. We're growing YouTube channel, and we need all the help we can get to defeat that YouTube algorithm, actually get our word out there. So final question for you, V Radio. Such an intelligent and complex guy, man. I am so honored to have had this conversation with you, and hopefully we'll have a whole lot more. Who do you think, well, rather, what do you think the verdict is going to be in this Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Oh, man, like, before they put Kyle on the stand, I was like, this is over. Like, but you're still at that point. It's a different kind of, like, there was a defense guy who pointed out, it's like, do you want to know what a guy who doesn't take the stand looks like? Yeah, well, they become a convict. Like, right. I'm not quoting it perfectly, but the problem is that there's too many variables. First of all, the defense team did good, but did not do well enough. There was a lot of specific information and arguments that should have been made. For example, self-defense is reliant on, I have to prove the reasonable belief that my life was in danger. Right. So they did not emphasize Joshua Zeminski's pistol shot.
That's
Kyle
absolutely
testified about it.
Yeah.
He said that I heard the gun behind me, and Zeminski had moved at him with a gun in his hand.
Yeah.
Like, I studied self-defense stuff because, ironically, I'm also a left-leaning guy who's a gun enthusiast. I think you should own a gun to protect yourself.
Right.
And I was like, what is he doing? Why isn't this happening? Like, because I've been making these damn arguments for them, this whole time. I'm like, Joshua Zeminski fired this pistol. Kyle doesn't turn around until after that.
Right.
And at that point, any question about was his life reasonably in danger? He has no fucking way of knowing whether or not that guy's shooting at him. That's he knows he moved on him. Yeah. So they left that out. Like, they didn't really emphasize it. And then even let Binger claim that it had nothing to do with
nothing to do it. I found that so peculiar. I was like, if I'm his attorney, I know, you have to teeter that ethical line, but I'd definitely say, oh, dude, you're going to say that you thought that bullet was coming your way. Like, come on. Like, that was a perfect opportunity right there to do exactly what you just said, to add that to the equation of him proving that he had reason to fear for his life.
Well, that's like basic self-defense that they teach people who want to be able to open carry.
Right.
Like, I'm like, and I'm not even a lawyer, and I would have made that argument. So they didn't emphasize enough on that. There's also just a screwed up system that we're in, that the prosecutor gets to go and lie a lot. Then the defense goes, and he did a good job. And then they get to rebut again. So then they got back on, and they lie some more. And you could see Richards like shifting in his chair, like, "Oh God, this is so like," and I had every reason to be angry. I was angry because I'm in the thick of this, because I watched ridiculous amounts of footage. I know what happened, and that's why like it took me like 30 seconds to go, this is the clip that they're not playing. So you're talking about hours of footage. I had a Rolodex in my head, knowing exactly where Rosenbaum was at that moment. But the point is that they didn't emphasize that. They weren't prepared, and more specifically, there's something weird going on. I'm kind of wondering if there are any cops in Kenosha that want Kyle to go down, because that weird thing with that drone footage and then how it got put together, something's not right. But, I don't know what the story is with that, and I don't want to make any accusations, but something's weird about it. And then the fact the FBI footage that just didn't exist and then did. And then they, of course, lost the high quality version. Like, how the hell did that happen?
Crazy.
So you're like, because that would have exonerated Kyle easily,
right?
Because what their point is they're suggesting that he brandished at the Zeminskis for like 0.3 seconds, which, mind you, if you had given me the time to formulate the argument, it wouldn't have mattered if they did, because he had a pistol in his hand. Like, I'm like, you easily could have said, okay, now Kyle's trying to run, not just from the crazy Rosenbaum dude, but from the dude with the pistol. He doesn't even shoot him then. He doesn't shoot until he's forced. So I'm sorry to have such a long answer. It's just, I've been in the thick of this for so long. But the point is that, do I know for sure? Well, the only hope that I can give you, and you can find this on my channel, because I made just a clip of it. I had the guy who was the leader of the Kenosha Guard on my show, and he's been in the courtroom every day. And I asked him, like we asked him as a panel, like, hey, what was the jury like? Because we haven't been able to look at them. You're not allowed to look at them for good reason. And he's like, well, he was very careful. He didn't put any of their lives in danger. He's like, well, first of all of them are old, which is actually good for Kyle. He said that most of them were gun owners, and then there was a question of like, at one point the judge said, because they all had masks on, he's like, you guys, masks are optional in my courtroom. And most of the people took the masks off. Now, mind you, the fact that masks and vaccines are a right versus left issue is silly to me in the first place. But he was pointing out, however, because he's a private investigator, is what he does. He's like, that was an indication to me that the jury is probably largely conservative, which is actually good, beneficial for Kyle.
Absolutely.
So it's possible that we'll be all right. But the jury is the question mark. And it's going to come down to that. I am leaning towards he may get a lesser charge of some kind. But other than that, I don't see him going away for life. But it's a lot closer than it really should be. And the reason it's closer is because of the screwed up way that our justice system works.
Oh, wow. I mean, good points. I personally think he's going to get off. I think that the evidence in his favor is too compelling. And I think that, although we try and pretend like juries can be impartial and not be influenced by their own research or what they've heard, I believe hearing what everybody in America has heard about Rosenbaum will not escape these folks. And the testimony of the Zeminski shooting, I think the jury's going to fill in that blank. You ever been on a jury?
I haven't been on one, but
I've been on a jury, and everything that they say you shouldn't do, juries do. But they tell you not to do it because they know human nature, you're going to do it. So they want to put you on notice that you shouldn't do it, but juries still do it. They still bring in, they still bring in their outside knowledge and influence and biases. Everything is inside that jury room. And to be honest with you, I think that this case there are so many cases that they could have put out there to railroad somebody with. This was not the case. Too many big glaring holes. I think Kyle's going to get off, and I think not in the Northeast, but I think definitely in Kenosha. They just gonna. You know what? I don't even think I'm gonna go out on a limb and I'm gonna say I don't think there will be riots. To be honest with you,
It's possible because I
look what
asked him
happened with
about
Jacob
that.
Blake.
Mhm.
First of all, you need to amend your documentary because you said that it started from a dumpster fire. No, it didn't. It started from a lie.
Oh no, that's fair. I did a separate video about Jacob Blake, and you know what it is? It's
Go
funny.
ahead.
Is it's a bait and switch. It starts with, "This is what the name of my video is:
Mhm.
Man rapes woman, then
Mhm.
returns to her house to
Mhm.
steal her kids and her car," or
Mm.
something to that effect. And I don't even say who the video is about. And
Right.
then I started off with that stupid meme that was getting passed around that he was breaking up a
Breaking up
fight.
the
He
fight,
had
right?
called the police. And I was like, this is all nonsense. And then I break it down in the video. This is
Mhm.
how this got manipulated. They played this video first. This is the one
Mhm.
that got circulated, which doesn't
Right.
show the cops fighting him and trying to hold him down or any of that.
Mhm.
We don't get to learn about that until 3 weeks later. By that time, the
Mhm.
riots have already started and Black
Right.
Lives Matter's already made all their money. And he's made $2 million. You know, no, you were right about that. I just didn't talk about Jacob Blake
Right.
because I didn't want to put. I mean, it was already an hour long, and it was
Yeah. So
Jesus.
we can go into it another time,
Yeah, sure, sure.
my point is the whole city, the whole country's on edge. After the truth comes out, this district attorney stands at the podium and calls Jacob Blake a sexual assaulter, a domestic abuser. He went into great detail as to how Jacob Blake is a domestic abuser and some of the tactics that Jacob Blake used in his relationship to control his lover. He went into all of that and said, in essence, that Rustin Shesky is a hero, and 20 people marched. 20.
Right. Well,
So
yeah,
I
and
don't
the
know.
and the
I don't.
demonstrations outside the courtroom have been very small too.
Yeah, it's like oftentimes it's just one person. It's just
Right.
George Floyd's uncle or something like that. So I have a feeling my PTSD of the George Floyd riots make me say, oh my God, it's going to be a big riot. But my logical brain says that nothing's going to happen, and I
Well,
think he's going to get off.
the weather is a factor too. Like
Mhm.
that was a problem for us at Occupy, for example, was once it
Mhm.
starts to get cold, people don't want to be out there anymore. Whereas during the summer, and especially with everybody getting all that COVID money, it was so much easier to be a rioter.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, right.
didn't have a job to worry about. You can just go
Mhm.
out there and burn stuff.
That's true.
But
That's true.
I'm hoping you're right. I do think, however, that it will be used as an excuse by people on the extreme left to become more extreme. And
Hmm.
but it's
It's possible, but I tell you what, man.
mhm.
From keeping my ears to the streets, like these activists, they don't resonate with folks who are in the trenches. Like they're not speaking to them, and it's only a matter of time until they turn against them. I
Yeah,
think. Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're headed in that direction. I do
Hmm.
believe that, and I
Yeah.
think that and not just about this either. It can be critical race theories, a couple of
Hmm.
other things that
Hmm.
it's not working.
Right, but
What
that's
I
a
would
separate conversation.
sure no, we can talk about that another time. But
But
I would
any
say
last
that
words? Hmm.
pay attention to Bill Maher
Hmm.
because he's unfortunately the mouthpiece of what the deep state Democrats like, and
Hmm.
he's finally turning on CRT and he's finally turning on BLM, and
Hmm.
and it's because of the fact that the Democratic Party recognizes that they can't keep doing this or they're not going to win any more elections. And then
Absolutely.
Virginia showed that. But as far as
Hmm.
final last words, thank you for having me on.
Hmm.
Check out my website, b-radio.us. There you can find my various social media. You
Hmm.
might want to do this too. Have
Hmm.
social media accounts because I get people constantly on YouTube, especially people giving the message like you and I are, which is calling
Hmm.
the left
Hmm.
out for doing bad things as
Hmm.
leftists.
Hmm.
The algorithm hates me too.
Hmm.
So what it is that if you get yourself a Discord, Telegram, whatever, and then
Hmm.
always post that you've gone live or this is your new video,
Hmm.
because I get people constantly who tell me that they didn't get their notifications or
Hmm.
somehow they got unsubscribed. And we
Hmm.
got to remember that YouTube has a financial incentive also to not monetize us and make sure we don't get people too fast because they're already
Hmm.
claiming that they're not making a lot of money. It's because they got to pay people so much, but
Hmm.
whatever. So I appreciate you having me on, dude. This has been a great conversation, and
Absolutely, absolutely.
when you come on my show, I want you to talk more than me.
Oh, no, it's all good. One thing, as a cop, you're a great listener. When I hear somebody saying something profound and worthwhile listening to, it's not a race to who can interject the most and who can be heard the most. What's important is the message. So if you are giving something to my viewers, then you can have the platform, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And I was learning a lot from what you were saying, and I appreciate you so much for giving me your time. The Strategic Eyes Show does have a Discord. We have well over 100 members, so I'd love to see you in the Discord, and I'll join your Discord as well. We have all social medias. We're on almost every platform. Please email me. It's a little back end stuff, but please email me your information so I can put it in the description box of this video. And
Sure.
it would be a pleasure and an honor to come over to your show when we have the time and further our discussion. And man, brother, I appreciate you so much, and thank you for all the activism that you've done. I know I got a lot of people from different political spectrums. I don't know if you notice all the different arguments they were having inside of, or debates rather, but that's how we do in Strategic Eyes. Everybody's debating. We had some far left folks debating far right folks, but no name calling. No person, no, I hate you. No, I want to see you destroyed. Just adults having conversations. So, man, thank you so much for adding to my show, my brother. You have a wonderful night, man.
Thank you.
All
It's
right.
great to be on.
We'll see you soon, brother.
Yep.
All right. All right, man. That was a really good discussion, man. That guy is so intelligent, so deep, so experienced in dealing with these social movements. And I appreciate his perspective and all the hard work he did on this Kenosha trial. I don't think we got into it, but he told me on the back end that the lawyers actually used some of his video. Yeah, this guy is actually a part of this Kenosha trial. He's a part of the Kyle Rittenhouse story. I'm sure it's, he's got his part there, so it was a really, really, really good get. And he reached out to me. I used his video, and he's like, hey, you could use my video, and I'd love to come on the show. So I'm grateful, because the guys with his experience on these platforms, a lot of times, they don't want to, share that wealth of knowledge with other people. The fact that he's willing to come on my show, a small growing YouTube channel, and definitely enrich us all with his experience and his point of view. Big shout out to V Radio. So yes, if you haven't subscribed to V Radio, please consider going over to V Radio. It's posted in the chat. Somebody will probably throw it out there. And subscribe to his channel. And yeah, subscribe to my Discord as well. Join the Discord. Consider joining our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the whole nine. If you're watching this channel and you're not a subscriber to the Strategic Eyes Show, please, I'm getting tongue-tied because I'm getting tired. Please subscribe to the Strategic Eyes Show. It's 12:39 where I'm at, 12:39 Eastern time, and I got to get up for work in the morning time. So please subscribe to the channel, subscribe to V Radio's channel, and absolutely 100% positively join our Discord. If you like the way people are talking inside of the comment section, where you have people from different political affiliations, parts of the political spectrum, and they're able to have deep, profound conversations without insulting each other, that's what we do in the Strategic Eyes Show, and that's what we do in our Discord. So the link for the Discord is inside of the chat. Click it. Discord is such a really good program that it makes it so easy for you to set up an account super fast. If you never had a Discord before, it'll set up your account in less than 2 minutes, and then you can start chatting with us. Shawnee's in Great Britain, and he said it's 5:39 a.m. where he's at, but we love Shawnee because Shawnee loves the show, and the show loves Shawnee. Shawnee, you are the man. I appreciate you. All right, guys, no time to hit the chat. Guys know I usually like to hit the chat, say what up and everything like that, but I'm crashing, and I gotta go take a shower, and I gotta slide into bed ever so quietly, not to wake mommy up, because then she'll kick me out and put me on the couch. No, she's not. Let me stop. All right, guys, Strategic is out of here. Peace. And let's pray for Kyle Rittenhouse, because honestly speaking, guys, if you think that he's guilty, remember, he's a 17-year-old kid, 17 years old, and remember who he shot. All right. There's so much facts that you can consider. I know I'm boiling it down too simply, but look at who he was involved with. the characters he is involved with. All right, guys, Strategic is out of here. Peace.